Tonight, we're venturing deep into the haunted heart of Texas, a land as wide as its skies, but just as heavy with shadows and stories that refuse to die. From forgotten hotels where screams still echo through rotting halls to ghostly roads lit by lights no man can explain, we're counting down 20 of the creepiest haunted places in all of Texas. These aren't just tales, they're warnings, because what lingers in these places has been seen, heard, and even felt by those unlucky enough to wander too close. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. And when they do, they miss out on the darkest, spine-tingling stories that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning, and the terror waiting in the shadows is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Drop it in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started, and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now let's dive into the darkness. The first time I laid eyes on the Baker Hotel in Mineral Wells, it was late afternoon. That hour when the light goes gold and every shadow in Texas seems to stretch itself tall. The place stood like a mausoleum above the town, 20 stories of red brick and stone, its windows black as punched-out teeth. Folks said it was going to reopen soon. The developers had finally gotten their hands on it. But from where I was standing on the broken sidewalk, it didn't look like anything had lived in there for decades. The air smelled faintly of rain on hot concrete, and though cars still rolled past on the streets below, the hotel seemed cut off from the living world, a kind of island of silence. I'd come down from Fort Worth because my uncle had worked in Mineral Wells years back, and when he was drinking, he'd tell me about the Baker. He claimed he'd seen lights moving behind the windows after midnight, and once heard a woman crying from somewhere high up. 7th floor, he said, his eyes cloudy with whiskey. That's where she stays. Rosewater like your grandma used to wear. You smell it and you know you ain't alone. He'd grin at me, but there was never much humor in it. Uncle. Sam was a man who believed in ghosts even when he swore he didn't. I parked my truck by the old Crazy Water Hotel and walked the block up. The Baker was surrounded by chain link fencing, but a section sagged where someone had cut through. Graffiti crawled across the lower walls, names and tags half faded. I ducked in and felt the temperature drop almost instantly. Inside, the lobby was a cathedral of dust and silence. The grand chandelier still hung there, dulled but intact, its crystals dangling like old bones. I couldn't help but imagine the place in its prime, when movie stars and oil men came here for the baths, their laughter ringing against the marble. But now the only sound was the crunch of my boots on grit. I walked deeper into the shadows, passing broken furniture and old, front desk stacks of yellowed paper. The smell hit me first, sweet, powdery, unmistakable rosewater. I froze. There was no breeze, no open window, nothing that could have carried scent inside, but it drifted thick as smoke, wrapping around me. My heart started to pound. Uncle Sam's voice was in my head. 7th floor. That's where she stays. I told myself I'd come too far to turn around. The elevators were long dead, their doors pried open to reveal shafts yawning down into darkness. I found the stairs and started climbing. Each step groaned, each landing littered with plaster and fallen beams, but the smell grew stronger as I went higher. By the time I reached the 5th floor, I was sweating cold. A faint sound drifted through the walls, a woman's voice, low, almost humming. On the 7th floor, the air was heavier, like the walls were holding in centuries of breath. The hallway stretched long and crooked, wallpaper peeled in curling sheets. Doors stood half open, their numbers rusted. I stepped slowly, the boards creaking under my weight. The smell of rosewater was everywhere now, choking sweet, and that humming turned into a soft weeping. It came from the far end of the hall where a door stood wide open. I don't know why I went inside, curiosity or stupidity, maybe both. The room was empty except for an old chair by the window, its fabric eaten by moths. The glass was broken, letting in a slice of evening sun that turned the dust into gold. And in the chair sat the outline of a woman, Not solid, not fully there, more like the shimmer of heat on asphalt. Her head was bowed, her dark hair hiding. Her face and the sound of her crying filled the room, though her shoulders never moved. I opened my mouth, maybe to say something, maybe just to gasp, but the sound caught in my throat. She lifted her head then, and though her features were blurred, the impression of eyes boring into me was unmistakable. The smell of rosewater surged so strong it made me gag. She rose from the chair, slow and deliberate, her body elongating, stretching too tall, her face smearing into something hollow. I stumbled back, hit the doorframe, and nearly went down. The weeping turned into laughter then, brittle and sharp like glass breaking. It filled the room, the hall, maybe the whole hotel. I ran, boots thundering down the stairs, slipping on plaster, clawing at the railing to keep upright. Every floor I passed, I swore, I felt something rushing behind me, pressing close, whispering, in a language I couldn't understand. By the time I burst into the lobby, my lungs were on fire and my throat tasted of blood. Outside, the night had fallen. The hotel loomed black against the sky, its windows still dead, still empty. But as I staggered toward the fence, I heard the faintest sound of a ball bouncing, soft and steady like a child at play. I looked back just once and saw light glimmering in one of the upper windows. 7th floor. A dim yellow glow, like a lamp left on by someone waiting. I never told Uncle Sam what I saw. He died a few years later, his stories about the baker still rattling in my head. But I'll tell you this much. That smell of rosewater never left my clothes. I burned them, every stitch. And still sometimes I wake in the night with the taste of it in my mouth, cloying and sweet, and I can hear her crying in the dark, waiting for me to come back. The first time I saw Yorktown Memorial Hospital, it looked less like a building and more like a warning. The place sits back from the road, framed by sagging oaks and a barbed wire fence that leans inward, as though even the land itself is trying to cave in on it. The paint on the brick is the color of dried blood, peeling in wide, ugly strips, and the windows are all blind, most of them broken out, jagged glass teeth catching the weak Texas light. I had driven down from San Antonio after hearing too many stories to ignore. I told myself it was curiosity, but the truth is, part of me wanted to be afraid again. Real fear. The kind that presses against your chest and makes you doubt the ground beneath your feet. Yorktown is one of those towns you miss if you blink. A place where the gas stations close early, and the air feels stuck somewhere between dust and heat. By the time I pulled up outside the hospital, it was late afternoon, and the sun was sinking into a haze of orange that made the building seem alive, glowing faintly from within. I parked near the old entrance, a rusted set of double doors hanging, crooked, and for a moment I thought I saw someone standing just beyond them. But when I blinked, the shadow was gone. Inside, the air was heavier than it should have been. Stale, yes, but something else, something oppressive. It pressed against my ears the way deep water does. The first hallway stretched out like a tunnel, tiles cracked underfoot, walls swollen with moisture. A peeling sign still hung near the entrance, listing the wings, Emergency Pediatrics Chapel. I started with pediatrics, not sure why. Maybe because that was the one I was most afraid of. The hallway into that wing was darker, windows bricked over or boarded shut. The silence was complete except for the sound of my boots on the tile, each step sounding louder than it should. Then I heard it. Faint, almost playful, the high-pitched trill of a child's laughter. I froze, held my breath, and listened. It came again, farther down the hall, bouncing off the walls in a way that made it impossible to tell where it started. My first thought was that it had to be a trick, some local kids playing games, but the air was so thick and unmoving I couldn't imagine anyone hiding in it. I moved slowly, passing open rooms filled with overturned beds, gurneys with rotted straps dangling like dead vines, paint blistered in strange shapes. In one room, a tiny wheelchair sat in the corner, rust eating its frame. The laughter came again, sharper this time, almost manic, and the air seemed to drop a few degrees. My skin broke out in goosebumps. I whispered hello before I could stop. Myself. Nothing answered. Nothing human anyway. By the time I reached the end of the hallway, I was sweating, though the air was cold. A set of double doors led into what must have been the playroom. They groaned as I pushed them open, and inside, scattered across the floor, were dozens of dolls. Not clean, not neat. These were broken, faces cracked, hair missing, eyes staring in different directions. A few were missing limbs, and one sat propped up on a chair in the corner, its glass eyes fixed directly on the doorway. I stood frozen, every nerve screaming at me to turn back when a ball rolled slowly across the room, bumping against my boot. I didn't wait to see what pushed it. I backed out, closed the doors, and stood in the hall with my heart beating so hard I could taste metal in my mouth. The next sound came from the chapel, a low droning hum, like someone chanting under their breath. I told myself it had to be wind, but I was already moving toward it. Some part of me wanted proof, wanted to look straight at whatever lived in that place and know it was real. The chapel was worse than pediatrics. The air was thick, hot like breath, and it stank faintly of mildew and something sharper, coppery, like blood. The pews were still there, warped and split, and at the front stood a massive wooden crucifix, the figure of Christ blackened and cracked as though it had been scorched. Candles lined the altar, melted down into lumps, though none of them were lit. The humming was louder here, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once, a low vibration that made my ribs ache. I sat down in one of the pews because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore, and as soon as I did, the air shifted. It grew heavier, pressing down on my shoulders, squeezing my throat. I tried to swallow and couldn't. My chest tightened, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I clawed at my collar like something invisible had hooked its fingers around my neck. In the corner of my eye, movement, figures, dozens of them lining the walls of the chapel. Shadows shaped like nuns, faces hidden in black, their hands folded in prayer. They stood still as statues, but I could feel their eyes on me. The pressure on my throat grew sharper like a rope tightening. I forced myself up, stumbling down the aisle, and the moment I crossed the threshold, the air released me. I fell against the opposite wall, coughing hard, tears burning my eyes. When I looked back into the chapel, it was empty, the shadows gone, the humming silenced. I left after that, but not before one last thing. As I passed back through the entrance, the broken double doors still hanging loose, a voice whispered directly into my ear, soft and close, as though someone leaned in behind me. It was a child's voice, sweet, innocent, and filled with hate. Don't come back. I didn't run, not exactly. My legs moved faster than I thought possible, and I didn't stop until I was back in my truck, hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the ignition. As I pulled away, I looked back once. The hospital loomed in the fading light, and in one of the top windows, just for a moment, I saw a small, pale face watching me leave. I drove through the night without stopping, and even now, years later, I can still feel the hands on my throat whenever I close my eyes too long. Yorktown isn't a hospital anymore. It's a mouth. And sooner or later, it swallows whatever walks inside. Presidio La Bahia sits on a rise above the San Antonio River in Goliad, its stone walls stubborn against the passing of centuries. If you've ever driven through that part of South Texas, you know how empty it feels, how the air clings to your skin even in the dead of night, hot and thick with the smell of mesquite and river mud. I was never one to believe in ghost stories, but I made the mistake of taking a historian friend up on his offer to spend a night inside the fort. He had been granted access for research, digging through documents, recording the creak of doors, the way the candlelight dragged shadows across the plaster. He said it was for an archive, a cultural preservation project, but I knew he wanted something more. He wanted proof of the stories people whispered about Presidio La Bahia, and I was foolish enough to go along. We arrived just before dusk. The sky had that bruised purple look, the sun sinking low enough to ignite the horizon. The chapel stood quiet, its bells silent, though I swore I could feel the weight of every service ever held there. There's a heaviness about the place, as though the ground still remembers the blood spilled in 1836 when Colonel Fannin and his men were massacred after surrendering. You don't need a plaque to tell you what happened there. The air knows, the stone knows, and once the sun dipped below the horizon, I think the dead knew we had arrived. We set up our cots in a small barracks room that had been cleared out for visitors, though I doubt many people actually stay the night. My friend busied himself with his recording equipment, muttering about sound levels and resonance while I leaned against the cold stone, watching the candlelight flicker across the vaulted ceiling. By the time the last orange light of day was gone, the fort seemed to settle into a silence that was different from any quiet I'd ever known. It was not absence of sound, but a waiting, a breath held in stone lungs. Around 11, we walked the courtyard. The air was cooler, the cicadas quieted, replaced by the far-off yip of coyotes and the shuffle of river water. My friend wanted to record in the chapel. We lit a few candles and sat near the altar, the wooden crucifix above us casting a long shadow across the floor. He asked questions into the stillness, the way ghost hunters do. Who remains here? Do you remember Goliad? His voice bounced off the stone, falling flat as though swallowed by the walls. I said nothing, but every hair on my arms stood on end. It wasn't fear exactly. It was awareness, the feeling that someone else was in the room, someone listening. When midnight came, the sound began. At first I thought it was wind, though no breeze passed through the chapel. It was a faint rhythm, a cadence like footsteps echoing across flagstones. Heavy boots, many of them, marching in time. I froze. My friend's recorder picked it up, the red light blinking. The sound grew clearer, distinct, and I realized it wasn't inside the chapel. It was outside, moving across the courtyard, dozens of men in lockstep. We looked at each other without speaking, and I could see the truth in his face. He had wanted this, he had gotten it. I edged to the doorway, peered out into the moonlit yard. The stones gleamed pale under the sky, the old walls casting thick shadows, but no one was there. Still the boots pounded, the cadence unbroken, circling the courtyard like a parade drill. My heart hammered in my chest, and I swore the ground, trembled with each impact. My friend stepped past me, his recorder raised, whispering notes as though his voice might not disturb them. He moved closer to the sound, but the moment he stepped into the center of the yard, the marching stopped. Silence dropped hard, so sudden it made my ears ring. He turned slowly, eyes scanning the walls. Nothing. We retreated to the barracks, though sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the boots again, not outside but in the hallway, pacing, stopping just outside our door. Once, I heard the faint clink of metal like a rifle sling shifting on a shoulder. My friend lay still, his recorder running, but neither of us dared move. Around 3, the air grew cold, a deep chill that seeped through the stone. That's when I smelled it. Smoke and iron, like a blacksmith's forge doused in blood. Smell was sharp, metallic, unmistakable. My stomach turned and I pressed my hand against the stone floor to steady myself. It was cold, but I could feel a vibration, as though the earth itself carried the memory of gunfire. At some point, exhaustion took me, though it was not restful sleep. I dreamed of rows of men lined against the wall, their faces gray and hollow, eyes locked on something just beyond me. I heard a volley of rifles, felt the impact in my chest, and woke gasping, my hand clawing at my shirt. My friend was sitting upright, his eyes wide, staring at the corner of the room. I followed his gaze, and in the dim candlelight I saw what he saw, a figure in uniform, barely more than a shadow, but solid enough that the outline was clear. A man with a musket at his side, his head bowed, standing guard at a post no one had relieved him from in nearly 2 centuries. We did not speak. We only watched, barely breathing, until the figure faded into the stone. My friend's recorder had died sometime in the night. The batteries drained, though we had replaced them fresh. By dawn, we left the fort, neither of us looking back. I have never returned to Goliad, though I still hear the boots sometimes in dreams. Not dreams exactly, memories. Because I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. The soldiers never left Presidio La Bahia. They are still there, marching their endless rounds, their duty never complete. And if you stand in that courtyard, at midnight the ground will tell you the truth. Some blood never dries, some men never stop marching. Austin, Texas has its way of wearing history. The city booms with glass towers and buzzing bars on 6th Street, yet old bones lie underneath the music, buried beneath layers of cement and neon. The Driscoll Hotel sits right there on Brazos Street, a grand gold-lit behemoth wrapped in Romanesque arches and Victorian pride, its face looking out like it knows things no one else dares to speak. Built in the 1880s by a cattle baron, the hotel was meant to be a monument to wealth and permanence, a palace of marble and velvet where every guest could feel like royalty. But the place collected more than cigar smoke and ballroom laughter. It collected grief, it collected secrets, it collected the dead, and the dead did not leave. I had known of the hotel for years before I stepped foot in it. If you live in Texas long enough, you hear the stories. The little girl rolling her ball down the halls after tumbling to her death on the grand staircase. The jilted bride who hanged herself in her room. The politicians and soldiers who never quite checked out after their last drink. It sounds like campfire talk, Austin's version of folklore. But every time I drove past that limestone facade, with its golden glow cutting through the night, I thought of how a hotel is nothing more than a crossroads, thousands of lives brushing against each other, leaving behind slivers of joy, misery, and regret. Crossroads are where strange things happen. When I finally booked a stay, it was for work. A conference downtown, 2 nights in Austin, and the Driscoll was offering a discounted block of rooms. I told myself it was practical. I told myself it would be nice to finally see the inside, not just admire it from the street. What I didn't tell myself, though, was that I wanted to test the stories. Part of me, that darker curiosity you don't always admit out loud, wanted to see if the place had teeth. The lobby hit me first. The marble floors gleamed under the chandelier light, and the columns rose heavy and commanding, capped with gold leaf that caught every flicker of light. The place smelled faintly of polish and age, like leather books kept too long in a wooden cabinet. A band was playing in the lounge off to the side, the sound of a saxophone echoing faintly through the cavernous space, smooth and eerie at the same time. The front desk clerk, smiling like she'd rehearsed it 100 times, gave me a key card and told me the elevators were just past the columns. I checked into the room, tossed my bag down, and stood by the window a long while. The lights of 6th Street spilled upward, voices rising from the bars below, a carnival of music, laughter, and shouts. But the room itself was quiet, too quiet. The carpet muffled my steps, and even the hum of the air conditioner sounded distant, as if the walls were swallowing the sound. The first night passed uneventfully. I went down to the lounge, had a drink, came back and fell into bed. But just after 3 in the morning, I woke up. Not to a sound, not to a nightmare, but to a feeling. The bed shifted as if someone had just sat down on the edge near my feet. I froze. My eyes adjusted to the faint blue light creeping past the curtains, and I could see the indentation on the blanket, a dip in the mattress that had no reason to be there. I thought of saying something out loud, of calling the darkness bluff, but my throat closed up. I stayed there, every muscle taut, until the weight lifted, slow and deliberate. When I worked up the courage to flick on the bedside lamp, nothing was there. The blanket smoothed itself out as though it had only been my imagination. The next morning, I convinced myself it was fatigue, a half-dream mistaken for reality. But by evening, I noticed the second oddity. Coming back from dinner, I walked the long, carpeted hallway toward my room. That's when I heard it. The faint echo of a ball bouncing. A hollow, rhythmic thump traveling down the corridor, light and steady, followed by the roll of something round across the marble near the elevator landing. The sound carried, rising and falling as if a child were at play, except the hallway was empty. My heart climbed into my throat as I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the direction, But when I turned the corner, the noise cut off. The silence that followed was worse. Inside my room, I noticed something new. My bag, which I had left zipped, was open. The contents weren't scattered or rifled through like a thief might leave them. No, they were arranged. My shirt, folded once and set. Across the chair, my book placed neatly beside the lamp. My phone charger laid out straight on the desk, coil untangled as if a mother were straightening up a child's mess. I stood there, staring, knowing damn well I hadn't touched any of it. Sleep that night did not come easy. When it did, it came with whispers. I woke to the sound of a girl's giggle, faint, high-pitched, carrying from the hallway into the room through the crack beneath the door. A cold draft rolled under with it, brushing the bare skin of my ankles. I sat up, pulse thudding in my ears, and the giggle faded. I turned on the lamp again, but the light didn't banish the unease. The corners of the room seemed too deep, shadows clinging there like wet stains. By the third day I was exhausted, jittery from lack of sleep and too much coffee. The conference dragged and I barely heard the speakers. I couldn't stop thinking about the girl, because it had to be her. Every story I'd ever heard about the Driscoll came back sharp in my head. A senator's daughter maybe, chasing her ball down the grand staircase in the late 1800s, tripping on the marble, her neck snapping before she even reached the landing. They say her father wept in the lobby for hours, that her ball kept rolling after she was gone. Luxury draped over sorrow, people said, as if money and marble could keep grief from seeping into the foundation. That evening, determined not to be rattled again, I sat in the lobby until near midnight. I watched guests come and go, tourists, snapping photos, businessmen striding through with their phones pressed to their ears. None of them seemed to notice anything wrong. The hotel was alive, but only on the surface. Beneath it, I could feel the press of something else. I stayed there until the crowd thinned and the band packed up their instruments, until the staff began wiping down tables. When I finally went back up to my room, the hallway stretched out in silence, dim lamps glowing against the burgundy wallpaper. I inserted the key card, pushed open the door, and froze. The room wasn't empty. She was sitting on the bed. A little girl, maybe 7, dressed in a pale, old-fashioned dress with lace trim, her hair tied back with a ribbon. A red rubber ball rested in her lap. Her face was soft, her eyes dark and wide, but they held no warmth. She looked at me with that distant expression children sometimes get when they don't understand but pretend to. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I couldn't. Then she lifted the ball and let it drop. It bounced once against the carpet, then rolled toward me, slow and deliberate before stopping at my shoes. I backed out, stumbling, my hand fumbling for the door handle. When I finally slammed it shut, I heard her laugh, faint as a wind chime. I didn't go back in. I didn't sleep in that room again. I checked out before dawn, and the clerk didn't ask questions. Maybe she already knew. Maybe they all know. The Driscoll wears its beauty like a mask, but what waits behind those velvet drapes and marble staircases isn't luxury. It's grief, layered so thick it seeps into the beds, into the carpet, into the very air. And if you're unlucky, it doesn't just brush past you. It sits down beside you, it watches, it waits for you to notice. I still feel the weight on that mattress sometimes when I close my eyes, the slow press of something unseen, as if a little girl has found me again and wants to play. The desert around Marfa doesn't look like much during the day, just a flat expanse of scrubland broken up by distant ridges and the occasional wind-battered fence line. Heat hangs there in a way that feels heavy, even in October, the air shimmering above the highway like the world is breathing. Folks who've lived in that part of Texas all their lives will tell you the place carries a silence that isn't natural. It's not the quiet of peace, but of expectation, like the land is holding its breath. The first time I saw the lights, I thought it was just a trick of that silence, or maybe fatigue after too many hours on the road. But the desert has a way of letting you know when something out there wants to be seen, and that night it wanted me. I'd pulled off Highway 90 just outside of Marfa after driving from Alpine. I was supposed to meet a friend in town the next day, crash at his place and spend a weekend drinking beer and watching high school football the way we used to. I'd heard of the Marfa lights growing up, the way you hear of chupacabras or Llorona, stories told late at night, more entertainment than warning. But there I was, alone, the radio nothing but static, the engine ticking after I killed it. And the desert sprawled out so wide it made me feel like a dot on the map God had forgotten to erase. And then they appeared. At first, I thought it was headlights, maybe a truck off in the distance where no road should be. Two orbs, pale white with a faint orange rim, floating low against the horizon. They didn't stay still. They darted left, then right, rising a little, then dipping down toward the scrub like someone was swinging lanterns on ropes. My first thought was logical enough. Oil workers, surveyors, someone out there with flashlights. But the way they moved wasn't human. Too fast, too sharp, like something alive and curious. I remember leaning against the hood of my car, trying to convince myself it was nothing while my stomach twisted in ways I couldn't reason with. I should have stayed by the car. That's the part of the story I replay the most. But you don't. Come face to face with one of Texas's biggest mysteries and just ignore it. Maybe it was the beer I'd had at lunch still buzzing faintly in my veins. Maybe just the arrogance of thinking nothing out there could hurt me. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped off the shoulder into the mesquite and creosote. The desert. Smell was sharp, almost medicinal, and every step crunched loud enough to make me think I was announcing myself. The lights drifted farther out, slow enough that I felt invited, like they wanted me to follow. That idea should have sent me running. Instead, I kept walking. The sky was black as ink, scattered with stars, the kind of view you only get when there's 100 miles between you and the nearest Walmart. The lights glowed brighter the deeper I went, until I realized there were more than two. A third, then a fourth, smaller ones bobbing higher in the air, pulsing faintly as though keeping time with some rhythm I couldn't hear. They weren't just out there. They were circling. Every time I stopped to catch my breath, I swore they edged closer, like coyotes testing how far they could push before you bolted. I should have turned back, but each time I tried, I felt that pull, like someone had tied a string to my chest and was reeling me in. I lost track of time out there. My watch ticked on my wrist, but I couldn't bring myself to look. The scrub all looked the same after a while, and when I glanced over my shoulder, the highway lights were gone, swallowed by the black. Panic began creeping in, a thin vine wrapping tighter around my throat. The lights didn't panic, though. They grew. Bolder. One dropped low, no more than 20 feet away, hovering just above the sand like a ball of gas that hadn't decided if it wanted to be fire or ice. My flashlight beam hit it dead center, and instead of scattering or flickering out, it shimmered, breaking apart like liquid mercury and reforming again. That was the first moment I knew, deep in my marrow, that whatever those things were, they weren't natural. I tried calling out, half a joke, half a plea. "All right, you got me. Come on out." But the desert ate my voice. No echo, no response. Just the faint hum of wind. That's when the smell hit me. Ozone, sharp and electric, like air after lightning, except there hadn't been a cloud in the sky for days. My skin prickled, hair standing stiff on my arms. The orbs pulsed brighter, quickening, almost agitated. I could feel the vibration in my teeth, a buzzing under my tongue that made it hard to breathe. And then they moved. All at once they rushed closer, surrounding me in a wide circle, each hovering at a different height. Some darted upward, others swooped low, and I swear one passed so near my ear I felt the heat of it. I froze, clutching my flashlight like a useless weapon. My mind screamed to run, but my legs refused, like something was rooting me in place. They pulsed again, faster, a rhythm now, and I understood in some wordless way that I was being measured, examined, maybe even judged. I thought about my friend waiting in town, about my mother who'd always warned me that pride gets men killed quicker than bullets, and I begged under my breath for them to let me go. When it ended fast. The orbs shot away in every direction, streaks of light vanishing into the horizon until I was left in darkness so thick it pressed against me. My flashlight flickered, then died, leaving me blind. The silence was unbearable, my ears ringing with the ghost of that hum. I staggered, desperate, picking a direction and stumbling through mesquite thorns that tore at my jeans. I don't know. How long I wandered before I saw the faint orange glow of my car's hazard lights blinking. I don't remember turning them on, but I didn't question it. I threw myself behind the wheel, locked the doors, and sat shaking until the first light of dawn cracked the sky. The strangest part came later. Back in town, I told my friend what happened. He just stared at me, pale as a sheet, and asked to see my watch. When I held out my wrist, the face was cracked, hands frozen at 11:47. I'd checked the clock on his kitchen wall not long after. It was nearly 3 a.m. I'd lost hours out there. To this day, I don't know what happened in that missing time, and I don't want to. I only know that when I drive through Marfa now, I keep my eyes straight ahead and never stop, no matter what dances on the horizon. I stayed a single night at the Jefferson Hotel, and I have never fully shaken the weight of what happened there. People tell you East Texas has a certain kind of charm, moss hanging thick over cypress branches, little brick towns that haven't changed much since the 1800s, and that slow drawl of life that makes you feel like time forgot the place. Jefferson, with its antique shops, narrow brick streets, and steamboat history, felt like it was selling nostalgia by the pound. The Jefferson Hotel stood right at the heart of that image. A big red brick building with white trim and ironwork balconies that looked like they belonged in New Orleans. I booked a night because I'd read about its history, how it had once been a brothel and a boarding house, how people swore they saw figures in period dress drifting through its hallways. I thought it was just local color. I didn't go looking for ghosts, but they found me anyway. The first thing you notice about the Jefferson Hotel is the silence. Even with tourists outside and cars passing by, when you step inside, it muffles. The air changes, becomes heavier, as if someone dimmed the world. The lobby smelled faintly of old wood and lemon polish, though beneath it there was something else, a musk like damp velvet. The man at the front desk wore a half smile, polite but distracted, like someone who knew more than he'd ever tell a stranger. He handed me a key, an actual brass key, not a card, and pointed to the staircase. My room was on the second floor, just down the hall from the infamous Room 19, the one I'd heard whispers about, though I wasn't in it. I laughed at myself for even thinking about it. Ghost stories don't bleed into real life. At least that's what I thought. The hallways were narrow, carpet-worn but clean, lined with gilt-framed mirrors and old photographs. My room creaked when I opened it, the hinges groaning like they hadn't been touched in years. Inside, there was a 4-poster bed, quilt folded, neat lace curtains hanging beside tall windows that overlooked the street. The furniture all looked genuine, not replicas, as though they'd been pulled right out of the 19th century. That was part of the charm, I guessed. I set my bag down and lay on the bed, listening to the faint hum of the air unit, though the room was still warm. I dozed for maybe 20 minutes before the sound of footsteps in the hallway pulled me awake. Slow, steady like a man in boots. I sat up listening. The steps paused right outside my door. Then nothing. I waited for the knock that never came. When I checked, the hallway was empty. The air smelled faintly of pipe smoke, though no one was there. I told myself it was imagination, fatigue, maybe even old building quirks. Still, I kept the chain lock on after that. I went out for dinner, tried one of the catfish places locals recommended, then came back around 9. Jefferson quiets down fast after dark. The streets felt empty, and the hotel was even quieter, as if it had drawn all the silence of the town into itself. I stopped in the lobby and saw no one at the desk. Just a little bell and that stale velvet smell, stronger now. My footsteps echoed against the wood floor as I climbed the stairs. Halfway up, I heard laughter above me. A woman's laughter. High, lilting, with an edge that made my skin prickle. By the time I reached the landing, it had stopped. My hallway was still and empty. The only light came from weak sconces casting yellow glows against wallpaper patterned with faded roses. I decided to shower, try to settle myself. The bathroom was small, clawfoot tub with a thin curtain, tile cracked in places. I let the hot water run, steam filling the air, trying to shake that tightness building in my chest. And that's when I heard it, through the hiss of the water, faint but clear. A whisper. not from outside the room, but inside it. A man's voice, low, like it was coming from the corner of the ceiling. I froze, water beating against my shoulders, straining to make out words. It wasn't English, at least not clear enough, more like muttering, a rhythm of speech. Then a second voice joined it, female, higher, closer. My throat tightened. I yanked the curtain back, water dripping everywhere, staring into the foggy bathroom. Empty. The whispering had stopped. My own breath was ragged, and in the fogged-over mirror I thought I saw a shadow beside me that wasn't mine. When I wiped the glass, it was gone. I told myself again it was pipes, echoes, anything rational. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking as I dried off. By midnight I was lying awake in the bed staring at the ceiling. The air unit rattled, doing little to cut the heavy warmth pressing in. I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the hallway sounded amplified. At one point I swear I heard someone breathing outside my door. I sat up, heart pounding, and it stopped, replaced by silence so deep it felt like pressure on my eardrums. Then came the footsteps again, only this time they moved across the ceiling above me, slow, deliberate, circling. I knew no one was supposed to be upstairs. The floor above was closed off to guests. I held my breath, listening to the measured steps until they reached the corner of the room, right above my bed. Then they stopped. That silence again, heavy, choking. I couldn't take it. I sat up, switched on the lamp, light flooding the room. Nothing, just me and the hum of electricity. I left the light on. Sometime near 2, the doorknob rattled. Not a mistake or casual bump. It twisted, turned against the chain. I bolted upright, blood hammering in my ears, staring as the knob turned back and forth like someone testing it. The chain pulled, metal clinking softly. My voice caught in my throat. I wanted to yell, to demand who was there, but I couldn't. The pressure of silence returned, stronger, almost suffocating. Then, as suddenly as it started, the knob stilled. The smell of pipe smoke drifted into the room, stronger than before. My stomach clenched, nausea rising. I waited, motionless, until the air cleared. When I finally got the courage to check, the hallway was empty again. I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the chair by the window, lamp on, staring at the door, at the mirror, at every corner as if expecting something to move. And maybe something did. In the glass of the window beyond my own reflection, I swear I saw another face once. Pale, eyes dark and hollow, lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. When I blinked, it was gone, replaced by nothing but my own tired eyes. At dawn, when the first light crept between the lace curtains, I packed my bag. I didn't even shower. I carried my things downstairs and found the lobby still empty. No one at the desk. The key clanged when I set it down. No receipt, no checkout, just the sound of that brass against wood. I walked out into the morning air, cooler, lighter, as if I'd stepped out of another world. I told myself later it was all fatigue, suggestion, the mind playing tricks in an old building heavy with stories. But there's one thing I can't explain. When I unpacked back home, my bag smelled faintly of smoke. Not like cigarettes, but like that same old sweet pipe smoke that had clung to the room. It lingered for days, no matter what I did. And sometimes, when I wake late at night in my own house, I think I hear footsteps in the hall, pausing just outside my door, waiting. La Carafe has the kind of presence that doesn't belong to a bar so much as it does to a shrine. Tucked at the corner of Congress Avenue, its brick walls lean with age, softened by candlelight that never seems to burn all the way down. People go there for the wine list or the atmosphere, for the feeling that you've stepped into another century where voices are low, shadows are long, and the air clings to you with something damp and unseen. I'd been there a few times before, usually with coworkers, but that night I went alone. The place felt different without chatter to buffer it. The flicker of flame against uneven brick, the old jukebox in the corner wheezing out songs older than anyone inside, and the way the ceiling fans spun lazily overhead like they weren't actually moving any air, just circling it like vultures, waiting for something to die. I chose a stool near the far end of the bar where the wall curves slightly and makes you feel boxed in. The bartender was a tall man with sleeves rolled to his elbows, moving like he knew where everything was without needing to look. He poured me a glass of red without asking, like he knew what I came for, and nodded once before drifting away. I was about 3 sips in when I felt the first touch. It was quick, like a fingertip grazing the back of my neck. Not strong enough to be a bump from someone walking by, not sharp enough to be mistaken for an insect. Just a deliberate brush, light and slow. I turned fast, expecting to see someone crowding behind me, but there was no one close. A couple at a table by the window, a woman halfway down the bar nursing a whiskey, and the bartender restocking glasses. Nothing else. I told myself it was imagination, the way a place like that primes your nerves before you even cross the threshold. But then the jukebox hiccuped, skipping half a beat before lurching back into song, and in the break I thought I heard a whisper under it. Not words, just a murmur. The kind you hear when you're falling asleep and aren't sure if it's in your head or coming from the hallway. I leaned back against the bar, scanning the room, when the bartender drifted by again. He didn't ask if I was all right. He didn't have to. He just smirked faintly and said, "Happens to everyone sooner or later." That should have been the point where I laughed it off, ordered another drink, and played along with the ghost stories that kept La Carafe alive in Houston's tourist brochures. But I didn't laugh. I didn't even smile. I asked him flatly, "What happens?" He didn't answer, just tipped his chin toward the dark staircase at the back. It led up to the second floor, which wasn't open to customers. I'd seen the roped-off section before, the sign that said staff only, and I'd heard the rumors of why. Some said it was storage, some said offices, but most people knew better. The second floor was where the weight of history sat, and every bartender since the place opened had learned to respect it. The night pressed on, candles burned lower, drinks shifted from wine to bourbon, and the customers thinned until it was just me, the woman with the whiskey, and the staff. That's when the touches started again. First my shoulder, then my forearm, each time like someone trying to get my attention without raising their voice. I clenched my hands around the stem of my glass until I thought it would snap. My eyes darted to the mirror behind the bar, warped and scratched from decades of polishing. And for just a heartbeat, I swore I saw another figure standing too close behind me. Not a clear figure, more a shadow shaped like a man, blurred as if I'd looked at him through water. When I spun around the stool, nothing was there, but the candle nearest me flared high, spitting wax against the brick, and went out. The bartender came over with matches, lit it again, and said, "Don't answer them." His voice was casual, but his hand trembled as he set the matchbook down. I stared at him, waiting for more, but he moved away again, busying himself with bottles that didn't need touching. The whiskey woman finished her drink, left a 20 on the counter, and slipped out the door without saying goodbye. It was past midnight then, and the city outside had gone quiet, the way downtown Houston gets after office towers go dark and only the streetlights keep watch. La Carafe felt like it had folded in on itself, tighter and smaller, until it was just me and whatever shared the air. The first sound came from the staircase, wood creaking, slow and steady, as if weight shifted from step to step. I told myself it was a staff member, maybe hauling crates, but the noise never reached the bottom. It just stopped halfway down. I turned toward it, my mouth dry, and that's when the whisper came again, this time closer, threading through the air right behind my ear. It carried shape, like a word I almost recognized but couldn't quite hold. My chest tightened, my instinct screaming to leave, but I stayed rooted. I think I wanted proof, something undeniable. And proof came. The glass in front of me slid an inch across the counter without my hand near it. Smooth and silent, as if nudged by invisible fingers. I yanked my hand back like it had burned me. The bartender finally looked at me then. Really looked. His eyes were tired, hollow, the kind you see on someone who hasn't slept through the night in years. He said, "If they touch you twice, you can walk away. If they touch you 3 times, you're theirs." My heart punched hard against my ribs. I tried to laugh, but the sound never made it past my throat. I asked him, "What does that mean?" He didn't answer, just walked to the far end of the bar, his shoulders hunched like he couldn't stand to watch. That's when the third touch came, firm on the center of my back, pressure that lingered, pressing me forward against the bar. I gasped, whipped around, and saw nothing but empty space and shadows crawling along the brick. I didn't finish my drink. I didn't pay my tab. I just bolted out the door into the heavy Houston night, the air humid and thick enough to choke. The streets were empty, the buildings looming silent, and still I felt the touch lingering on my skin, like fingerprints pressed into my spine. I didn't stop walking until I was blocks away, and even then I kept checking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone pacing me just out of sight. I didn't sleep that night. I don't sleep much at all anymore. Sometimes when the house is quiet, I feel the brush of fingers on my arm, or the weight on my back when I sit too long at the kitchen table. I left La Carafe that night, but I'm not convinced La Carafe ever let me go. On the north edge of Denton, tucked behind tangles of cedar and oak, the old Alton Bridge sits like a forgotten scar in the woods. Most people call it Goatman's Bridge, and they say the name with a mix of humor and nervousness, like the laugh of someone whistling in the dark. I had heard the stories growing up, same as anyone around there. A rusting iron truss bridge that went out of use decades ago but still pulls in teenagers, ghost hunters, and the kind of folks who want to test their courage after a six-pack. The legend was always the same. Cross the bridge at night, call, "Out for the goat man," and you might hear hooves on the planks, see glowing eyes in the brush, or worse, never come back at all. It's the kind of story that seeps into your bones even if you don't believe, because enough people swear they've seen something. I never thought I'd be one of those people until last October. A buddy of mine, Eric, was back in town from college. We'd been drinking cheap beer by the lake earlier in the night when he suggested we drive out to the bridge. He had that grin he always got when he was daring someone, that half-cocky, half-daring you to punk out look. It was close to midnight, the air cooler than it had been all week, the kind of North Texas night where you could smell cedar smoke from chimneys. I hesitated, because I'd always avoided Goatman's Bridge. Not because I was sure the stories were real, but because I'd known a kid in high school, a quiet sophomore named Clay, who vanished after he told friends he was going to spend the night out there. The cops said it was a runaway case. His mom still put flyers up years later. I never forgot that, but Eric pushed and I didn't want to be the guy who said no. So we went, just him, me, and his cousin Taylor, who had been tagging along all night. The road out to the bridge narrows into gravel and dirt, winding through patches of woods where the trees close in, swallowing the headlights. When we pulled up, the bridge loomed in the dark like the ribs of some giant animal, its rusting beams catching the pale wash of the moon. The wood planks creaked when we stepped on them, and the air smelled of stagnant water and iron. We stood in the middle of the bridge with only our phones for light. Eric laughed and called out, "Goat man, you here? Come on out." His voice echoed against the trees. Taylor joined in, stamping his feet like hooves. I wanted to laugh with them, but something in the stillness of the place pressed down on me. The woods were too quiet, no cicadas, no owls, nothing but the faint gurgle of Hickory Creek below. Then we heard it, a dull, steady clop on the far side of the bridge, too heavy for a deer, too deliberate for anything natural. Eric swung his phone light in that direction, but it only lit up beams and trees. Taylor muttered, "It's just someone messing with us," but his voice cracked. The sound grew louder, closer, the distinct rhythm of hooves on wood. My chest tightened and I whispered that we should go. Eric, either braver or dumber than both of us, called out again, "Goat man, we're here." That was when the beam of the bridge seemed to ripple, a shadow detaching from the iron like it had been waiting. The glow of two eyes burned in the dark, too high off the ground to be human, and fixed on us with a heat that made my throat dry. Up. Taylor cursed and bolted for the truck, but Eric stood frozen, his phone shaking in his hand. I grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back, but he wouldn't move. The air grew thick, like every breath was dragging through smoke. The smell of something acrid and sharp hit my nose, burnt hair, rotten meat. The clopping stopped, replaced by the groan of the bridge itself, as if the thing was pressing its weight into the planks. When it moved, it was fast, faster than anything that size should be. A blur of shadow, the glint of horns catching the moonlight, and Eric finally screamed. I yanked him so hard he stumbled, and we ran. Behind us came the pounding of hooves, shaking the bridge under our feet, each step echoing in my skull. Taylor was already in the truck, engine gunning. We dove into the bed as he hit the gas, gravel spraying, the bridge shrinking behind us in the red glow of taillights. But it didn't stop there. From the woods, we could hear it pacing us, something massive crashing through the underbrush, keeping up even as we hit 40, 50, the sound of hooves and the occasional flash of those burning eyes just beyond the trees. I thought for sure it would catch us. Then, as the road widened and the town's lights came into view, the noise fell away, leaving only our own ragged breathing. None of us spoke for a long time. When we finally pulled over at a gas station, Eric vomited in the parking lot. Taylor wouldn't stop swearing under his breath. I just sat there shaking, the smell of that thing still in my nose. We agreed never to talk about it again, but of course I can't stop replaying it. The weight of those eyes, the way the bridge seemed alive under its steps. A week later, I heard about a group of kids who went out there and never came back. Cops said they must have fallen into the creek, but no bodies were ever found. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving alone, I swear I hear hooves behind me, pacing the car, waiting for me to make the mistake of looking back. The first time I saw the Hotel Galvez, it didn't look like the kind of place where anything bad could ever happen. The sun was out that afternoon, the Gulf wind carrying salt and gull cries across Seawall Boulevard, and the old white stucco building with its red-tiled roof looked more like a postcard than a haunted house. It was only later, after I checked in and the sun went down, that I realized how much a place can change when the shadows begin to fill it. I came to Galveston. After a breakup I wasn't handling well. My friends told me to get out of Houston for a while, maybe go sit by the water, get some peace. The Galvez had a reputation, but I thought it was just local legend to draw in tourists. The Queen of the Gulf, they called it, with chandeliers in the lobby and a view that stretched across the bay. I booked 3 nights in September thinking off-season quiet would do me good. I didn't ask about rooms, just let the woman at the desk hand me a key with a brass tag, smiling like she knew more than I did. My room was on the 4th floor, facing the water. The hallway outside was carpeted in a deep maroon pattern, and the lights in the sconces glowed dim as if they'd been burning for 100 years without being changed. I remember thinking the air smelled faintly of salt and furniture polish, but underneath was something older, something stale, like long closed trunks or forgotten closets. The first night passed easy enough. I walked along the seawall, got a drink in the hotel bar, and watched the storm clouds roll in over the Gulf. By the time I went back upstairs, the wind had picked up, and the old building creaked in protest. Lying in bed, I could hear the waves even through the closed window, the water beating against the rocks below. I must have fallen asleep close to midnight. Sometime in the dark hours, I woke to the sound of someone crying. At first, I thought it was in the next room, a woman's soft sobs, steady and broken, muffled like she was holding her hands over her face. I sat up, listening. The crying didn't move, didn't shift like it would if someone were pacing. It just stayed in one spot somewhere near the corner of my room, near the bathroom door. My skin prickled. I told myself I was half dreaming, that it was the storm outside playing tricks. I turned on the lamp beside the bed. The room looked empty. Shadows stretched across the old wallpaper, the bathroom door standing ajar. I got up, heart thudding, and pushed it open. Nothing. No one. The crying had stopped as soon as the light came on, leaving the silence thick and watching. The second day I tried to shake it off, walked the Strand, ate fried shrimp, told myself the hotel's stories were getting in my head. At dinner I asked the waiter, half joking, if the place really was haunted. He smirked, but didn't answer. When I pressed, he only said, "Some rooms got more history than others." Then he walked away before I could ask what that meant. That night, the crying came back, louder this time, unmistakable. It woke me from a dead sleep around 3. It wasn't in the corner anymore. It was right beside the bed. A woman's voice, ragged, drowning in despair, whispering through clenched teeth. I could hear the catch in her breath, the wetness of it. I snapped on the lamp, and again the sound cut off sharp like it had been pulled from the air. The chair by the window sat empty, but I swear it rocked once, slow, as if someone had just stood up from it. I didn't sleep after that. I lay in the dim light until dawn, every creak of the building sharp in my ears. When I finally went down for coffee, the woman at the front desk looked at me with that same knowing smile. I wanted to ask her, to demand if she'd put me in the so-called suicide room I'd heard whispers about. But I didn't. I was afraid of what she might say. The third night was worse. The storm had come ashore, rain battering the windows, wind screaming around the eaves. The hotel felt alive with it, groaning under the force. I lay there, sleepless, waiting. Around 2, the sobbing started again, softer at first, then rising, filling the room. My chest tightened as I realized it wasn't just crying anymore. There were words, faint but clear enough to make out. He said he'd come back. It repeated again and again the same broken sentence. The voice shook with rage and sorrow. I clutched the sheets, unable to move, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, but in my periphery I could see a shape darker than the rest of the shadows near the bathroom door, a figure hanging slightly off the ground, head bowed, hair dripping wet like she'd just been pulled from the sea. I don't know how long I stayed frozen, staring without looking. The words kept coming until my throat went dry from trying not to scream. Then the ceiling light flickered and went out, the storm outside roaring even louder. In the pitch black, the sobbing stopped. What came next was worse. I felt the mattress dip, the weight of someone lowering themselves onto the bed beside me. I couldn't move. My skin crawled as cold air pressed against my neck, as though lips were brushing the skin. The whisper came again, right into my ear this time. He never came back. I don't remember leaving the room. One moment I was pinned there, the next I was in the lobby barefoot, heart pounding like a gun in my chest. The night clerk didn't even look surprised. He just slid a new key across the counter, one for a room on the ground floor near the pool. I didn't go back upstairs. I didn't pack. I didn't care. The next morning I left the Galvez with the clothes I'd been wearing and nothing else. I drove north through sheets of rain, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. I told myself I'd come back for my bag, my phone charger, the rest of it. I never did. Later I found out the story everyone in Galveston already knew. A young woman had once stayed in that very room, waiting for her fiancé's ship to return from the Gulf. When word came it had gone down, she tied a rope to the bathroom pipe and hung herself by the window, staring at the water where he'd vanished. They say some nights she still waits, crying, whispering, unable to understand why he never came back. And if you ever find yourself in the Galvez, key in hand, praying, for a quiet stay, I'll tell you this much. Ask them not to put you on the 4th floor, because when night falls and the storm rolls in, she'll be waiting. Her grief thick in the walls, her sobs filling the silence. And once you hear her, once you feel her sit beside you in the dark, you'll understand the truth. That hotel isn't just hiding a suicide room. It's keeping her there forever, and if you're not careful, it'll keep a part of you too. San Antonio is one of those cities where history doesn't just sit in museums or plaques. It breathes down your neck when you walk its streets. You feel it in the uneven cobblestones near the river, in the thick humidity that clings even after the sun goes down, and most of all in that squat, pale limestone mission that everybody knows by name. The Alamo isn't just a tourist stop. That place holds something, like the stones themselves absorbed the screams and smoke of that spring in 1836 and have never let go. I didn't go there looking for ghosts. I went because my cousin worked late-night security for the complex and asked if I wanted to ride along. He said the shifts were boring, mostly walking the perimeter, making sure drunk tourists didn't try to climb the walls or break into the courtyard. But he said it with this strange half-smile, like he knew something he wasn't telling me and I was curious. The night I went with him, it was sticky hot, the kind of September evening where the air doesn't move and you start sweating just by standing still. We parked near the Riverwalk and crossed over to the grounds. Even in the darkness, the front of the Alamo looked unreal, like a stage set, lit by a few lamps that gave the carved facade a hollow glow. The city sounds, the traffic, the music spilling from bars, seemed to fade the closer we got until the only thing I could hear was the cicadas and the faint hum of the security golf cart parked by the side entrance. My cousin, Mark, swiped his badge and we went in. Inside the courtyard, it was darker than I expected. There are a few lamps along the stone paths, but most of the light was coming from the moon, broken up by the branches of the oaks. The mission walls rose up pale against the night sky, and the long barracks stretched shadowed and silent. Mark started his routine, walking slow, flashlight aimed at the ground, pointing out places they had to check: gates, doors, windows. I stayed close, listening because there was a strange emptiness in that place at night. It wasn't just quiet, it was thick, like the air was pressing down heavier than anywhere else in the city. After maybe 20 minutes of walking, I started to notice things. At first it was just a sound, soft and irregular, like boots on gravel but far away. When I asked Mark if he heard it, he just shrugged, like it was nothing. But I could see the way his jaw tightened. We rounded the edge of the courtyard near the barracks, and that's when I saw it. A shape, faint as smoke but definite, pacing along the wall. A man, shoulders broad, head down, walking the same line over and over. My stomach dropped because it wasn't a trick of shadows. There was form, movement, like watching an old photograph walk out of its frame. I stopped dead, whispering to Mark, but when I looked again, the figure was gone. The gravel where it had been was empty. Mark told me not to freeze up, that it happened sometimes. Sometimes you see them, he said, almost under his breath. Just don't follow. He wouldn't explain what he meant, and I didn't press, but from then on, every step felt like I was being watched. We went into the long barrack, which is open during the day as part of the museum. At night it feels different. The exhibits, locked in glass and the air stale, heavy with dust. My flashlight beam caught the outlines of weapons on display, muskets, bayonets, and for a second I thought one of them had been moved. I leaned closer, and that's when I felt the temperature shift. It wasn't gradual. It was like stepping into a cold cellar. The sweat on my arms prickled into gooseflesh, and I swear I heard breathing. Not mine, not Mark's. It was low, ragged, like a man trying not to be heard. I turned, shining the light down the length of the room. At the far end, something flickered. Not the kind of flicker you get from shadows, but like torchlight. I saw the glow of it dancing against the stone, orange and alive, though there was no flame, no torch, nothing to make it. And in that flickering glow, I saw faces. Not clear like flesh and blood, but pale, blurred, stretched tight with something between rage and grief. They were staring straight at me, dozens of them, pressed against the walls as if the stone was all that held them back. I froze, heart pounding so hard I thought it would echo. Then the glow vanished. Just gone. The room was dark again, silent except for the blood rushing in my ears. Mark grabbed my shoulder and pulled me back outside, his face pale. He muttered something about not lingering in there too long, about how the barrack held more than people like to admit. He locked the door behind us and wouldn't look me in the eye. We walked back through the courtyard. I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just imagination, the power of suggestion. But as we passed the main mission building, I saw movement again. Up near one of the windows behind the iron bars, a figure stood. This one was clearer. A man in ragged clothes, his head bandaged, face smeared with something darker than shadow. He had this hollow look, like his eyes were two deep pits that still glowed faintly. And the worst part, he was watching us. Not pacing, not drifting. Just standing, unblinking, like he'd been waiting for someone to notice. When I blinked, he was gone, but the feeling stayed, thick in my chest. Mark told me to keep walking. He didn't say anything else, just walked faster, shoulders tight, until we were back by the entrance gate. Even outside, with the hum of cars and the chatter of late-night tourists floating across from the Riverwalk, I couldn't shake the weight of it. It felt like the place had followed me out. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the torchlight on stone and those faces pressed into the walls. I kept hearing boots on gravel, pacing back and forth, never stopping. A week later, Mark quit that job. He never explained why, but I didn't need him to. I already knew. The Alamo isn't a museum at night, it's a graveyard. And some of the defenders never left their posts. They're still there, pacing, watching, waiting, long after the battle ended. And if you're unlucky enough to stand in that courtyard in the silence, you might see them too, pale in the torchlight that doesn't exist. The White Sanitarium sits just outside Wichita Falls, half devoured by the weeds and prairie wind. Its walls the same color as the moon when it rises over the flat land. I first laid eyes on it when I was 19, heading out that way on a dare, the kind of foolish thing you do when you're young and convinced nothing can touch you. People around town whispered about it like it was alive, the way old folks whispered about rattlesnakes in the brush. Some said if you stared long enough at the rows of black windows, you'd see faces looking back, pale and watchful. Others swore they'd heard screaming on the wind, carried for miles. The place had been an asylum once back in the 1920s, then a nursing home, and then nothing at all. Now it's just 4 stories of hollow silence, square as a tombstone, with boarded doors and windows gaping like sockets. The first time I stepped onto the property, the air felt wrong, not like any empty building I'd ever been near. Abandoned places usually have a dead quiet, a vacuum of sound that makes your ears ring, but the sanitarium hummed low, like it was breathing. The prairie grass bent and hissed against the chain-link fence that leaned in patches. But that wasn't it. It was a vibration in my bones, a pressure on my chest like being underwater too long. I told myself it was nerves, but I'd grown up in Texas, spent plenty of nights out in fields and barns, even poked around old houses kids swore were haunted. Nothing had ever made me feel the way that building did, just by standing near it. Didn't go inside then. I just circled the perimeter, shoes crunching gravel, peering through broken windows. Most were dark, dust-choked, but once, just once, I saw movement. 3rd floor, left wing, one window where the moonlight caught on. Glass. A shape slid past, too fast to catch detail, but enough to freeze me in place. I stood there for 5 whole minutes staring, waiting for it to come back. It never did, but I walked home with my heart pounding, telling myself it was a trick of light. That night I dreamed of it, the windows full of faces, dozens of them pressed to the glass, mouths open wide in silence. I should have left it there, but I didn't. A year later, me and 2 friends decided we'd sneak inside. Tyler was the one who pushed for it, and when Tyler wanted something, the rest of us went along. He'd gotten hold of bolt cutters, and one sticky summer night we parked down the road and climbed the fence. The grass was waist-high, full of bugs and hidden rocks, and the whole building loomed ahead, swallowing starlight. Up close, it stank of mildew and iron, like old pipes and rust. The front doors had been sealed with wood planks, but Tyler grinned and swung the cutters like he was about to storm a castle. It didn't take long before we pried one loose enough to squeeze through. Inside, the air was thicker, heavier, stale with decades of dust and something else. Something sour and sweet, like rotting flowers. Our flashlights cut swaths through, the dark landing on graffiti, broken furniture, peeling paint. The lobby stretched out in front of us, wide and empty, but every sound we made bounced back tenfold. I remember the echo of our steps more than anything, the way it seemed to follow a second too late, as if something else was trailing us. The walls had faint outlines of where pictures or signage used to be, squares cleaner than the rest, as if the building remembered. The staircase ahead curled upward into darkness, railings spotted with rust, and for a moment none of us wanted to move. We started exploring anyway, room by room. The first floor was mostly offices, old file cabinets with drawers yanked out, papers scattered, some so brittle they crumbled to touch. Tyler laughed when he found a chart with "Restless" scrawled across the margin. said it sounded like a country song. We all laughed too loud, the sound jangling in the stillness, and I hated the way it felt, like something was listening. In the far corner, we found a heavy steel door with no handle, just bolts and rusted hinges. It didn't open, but pressing my ear to it, I swore I heard a faint thump, distant like footsteps pacing below. The second floor was worse. Long hallways with patient rooms on either side, doors yawning open, the smell stronger. That sweet rot, soaking the air. Some rooms still had beds, frames bent, mattresses collapsed in heaps of mold. In one, the headboard was gouged with scratch marks, deep enough you could fit your finger inside. Tyler joked about crazies tearing at it, but I noticed his hand shake when he lit a cigarette. We moved fast, but it didn't help. Every time we passed a room, I felt eyes tracking us, shadows shifting just outside the flashlight beams. Once, I turned too quick and caught a glimpse of something white at the end of the hall, there and gone before I could blink. We stood frozen, waiting, but nothing came. Tyler muttered we were spooking ourselves, but his voice cracked. By the time we reached the third floor, the air was so heavy it was hard to breathe. My shirt clung with sweat, my stomach twisted. The floorboards groaned under us, and each step felt like it might give way. Halfway down the hall, we found it, the room people in town called the Watcher's Room. Locals said if you lit a candle inside and stared into the mirror, you'd see someone behind you. The mirror was still there, tall and cracked, leaning against the far wall. I don't know why we went in, maybe to prove the stories wrong, maybe because we were too stupid to quit. Tyler set his lighter under his face and grinned, daring us to look. His flame flickered, casting shadows that didn't move the way they should. Behind him, for a split second, I saw a shape in the glass, taller, hollow-eyed, its mouth stretched too wide. I shouted, dropped my flashlight, and when I scrambled to grab it, the figure was gone. Tyler still grinning, though his eyes darted to the mirror too quick. We didn't stay long after that. On the way down, the building came alive. Doors slammed. Behind us, wind howled through hallways, though the air outside was still. And once, in the stairwell, a scream cut through the dark so sharp my ears rang. It wasn't human, not exactly. More like metal tearing mixed with a woman's cry. We bolted, stumbling through the first floor, out the broken door, across the weeds. The whole time, I swore I felt something at my back, inches away, reaching. I didn't breathe until we were back in the car, engine roaring down the highway, all of us pale and silent like kids caught in a storm. None of us spoke about what we saw, not that night, not in the weeks after, but it stayed with us. Tyler changed first. He started showing up with bruises he couldn't explain, stopped sleeping, said he kept seeing faces in the windows of his house. A month later, he disappeared. His car was found near the sanitarium, door open, keys still inside, no sign of him. They searched for days but turned up nothing. The other friend, Marcus, swore off ever going near it again, but 3 years later he hung himself in his parents' garage. The note he left said only, "They won't stop watching." I moved away, tried to bury it, but every time I come back to Wichita Falls, I can't help but glance toward that building. It's still there, white walls glaring under the sun, windows black and unblinking. Sometimes when the wind is right, I swear I hear that scream again, cutting through the prairie like it's meant only for me. I've never gone back inside, and I never will. Some places aren't just haunted, they're hungry, and once they've tasted you, they never let go. The white sanitarium waits, its windows watching, and I know someday I'll see Tyler's face there, pale and grinning, pressed to the glass. I used to think Houston's old downtown buildings were like monuments, surviving on nothing more than their brick bones, and the stubborn refusal of the city to bulldoze history for another glass tower. The spaghetti warehouse stood as proof of that. Red brick, tall, narrow windows, the kind of place where the past felt layered thick, like old wallpaper no one had bothered to strip. When I first walked inside, it was for dinner, nothing more. The smell of marinara and garlic bread clung to the air, but under it there was something older, like damp plaster and medicine left too long in its bottles. People laughed. Waiters hustled plates across the tiled floor, And I thought about how many must have sat in those same rooms before me, back when it wasn't pasta they were serving, but prescriptions. That was the thing most people didn't know unless they looked it up or heard it whispered. Before spaghetti, the building had been a pharmacy, one of those ornate turn-of-the-century apothecaries with oak shelves lined with glass jars and the bitter metallic tang of ground powders in the air. The pharmacist who ran it never made it out alive. Depending on who told the story, he either fell down the stairs after some long night of counting coins, or he was pushed, cheated in business by partners who wanted him gone. Others said he took his own life in despair. None of those versions ended well, and none of them explained why, to this day, people swore they saw him. I didn't believe it, not then. Ghost stories belong to campfires, not chain restaurants dressed up with hanging lamps and red checkered tablecloths. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something in that building wasn't right. The first night I ate there, I was sitting on the second floor near the staircase. Dinner plates rattled below in the kitchen, but when I glanced down, no one was there. Not a cook, not a busboy, nothing but a line of gleaming pots suspended from a rack. I told myself it was vibration from the old air conditioner or footsteps I hadn't heard. I told myself a lot of things that night because the truth was already clawing around the edges of my thoughts. I started going back, not because the food was that good, but because I couldn't let it go. Curiosity has teeth, and mine sank deep into that place. Each time something small would happen. A chair nudged out a few inches when I knew I hadn't moved it. A wine glass set on a table that sang a faint ring, even though no one had touched it. Once, a waitress dropped her tray halfway across the room because she said she felt someone brush past her shoulder, even though the aisle was empty. She was shaking too hard to pick it back up, and the manager had to rush in, red-faced, trying to laugh it off. The real trouble came when I stayed late. The restaurant cleared out slow, families with kids bundling into coats, couples finishing their wine. I lingered, pushing cold spaghetti around my plate, waiting to see if the pharmacist's ghost would actually show. It was near closing when I heard it. Footsteps on the staircase, steady and slow, heel to wood, as if someone heavy was descending. I turned, but the stairs were bare. Still, the sound kept coming, closer, until it stopped one step from the bottom. My chest tightened like I'd been holding my breath for too long. That was when the lights above the bar flickered, just once, enough to make the glassware catch a strange, fractured glow. One of the waiters muttered under his breath, "He's pissed tonight?" and didn't explain. I wanted to ask, but I couldn't seem to move my jaw. It wasn't fear yet, not the kind you run from, but something worse. The creeping sense that the building itself was watching me, through every pane of glass, through the shadows between the beams. That night I went home and dreamed of stairs that never ended. Each step coated in dust, each landing darker than the one before. By the third week I was obsessed. I read every scrap of history I could find. The pharmacist's name was Charles Donnellan, though sometimes records spelled it differently, and his death certificate was vague, listing only accidental fall. The coroner's note was smudged, almost unreadable, but the word fracture stood out. Skull, neck, both maybe. And there were rumors that after his death, people in the neighborhood heard the sound of mortar and pestle grinding at odd hours, long after the store had closed. Customers swore they saw his figure behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, head bent to some invisible task. It was late on a Thursday when I finally caught more than footsteps. The dining room was empty but for me, and the staff were sweeping, near the door waiting for me to leave. I walked the staircase slow, each creak of the wood loud in the silence. Halfway up, the air grew colder. My skin prickled and I caught a whiff of something sharp. Not food, not cleaning chemicals, but something closer to crushed herbs, bitter and pungent. I reached the landing, and that was when I saw him. Not fully, not with my eyes in the way I wanted, but in the shimmer of glass at the far window. A tall man, shoulders square, coat buttoned up, his face twisted with something I can only call fury. His mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear. Then the reflection was gone, leaving only my own pale, wide-eyed stare. I didn't sleep that night. I sat awake, lights on, every noise in my apartment making me jerk. Still, by Saturday I went back. That's what people don't tell you about haunted places. It's not always about fear. Sometimes it's about hunger, about needing to know if what you saw was real. I wanted proof, something I could hold in my hand. So I brought a small recorder, tucked it in my jacket pocket, and sat in the same seat near the staircase. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, as the last guest drifted out and the waiter stacked chairs, I heard it. A whisper, faint but clear, rising through the hiss of the air vents. It wasn't English. It sounded like Latin, the way priests chant at funerals. My recorder caught it, though when I played it back later, it warped. The voice too loud, too close, like someone leaning right against the mic. I nearly dropped the device, my heart hammering as the words spilled out, syllables thick and angry. I only recognized one, mortuus. Dead. The next time I went, I wasn't welcome. That's the only way I can describe it. The second I walked, through the door the air pressed heavy like humidity before a storm, but colder. My chair wobbled when I sat, though the floor was flat, and when I reached for my fork, it slid an inch away, as if nudged by a hand I couldn't see. My stomach clenched, not from hunger but from dread. I should have left then, but I didn't. I stayed, staring at the staircase, waiting. When the crash came, it sounded like every plate in the kitchen shattering at once. Staff rushed in, but nothing was broken. Nothing had moved. That's when I noticed the dust drifting down from the ceiling, like plaster shaken loose. I tilted my head back, and I swear to you I saw footprints, dark and heavy, pressed into the wood overhead, as if someone walked upside down across the beams. I never went back after that, not inside anyway. But sometimes I park across the street, late at night. The windows of the spaghetti warehouse glow warm with light, but I see more than customers inside. I see him, pacing the staircase, stopping at the landing, glaring out at the world that kept spinning without him. The air tastes bitter when I sit there too long, like medicine dissolving on the tongue. And when I finally drive home, I keep checking my rearview mirror, because more than once I've seen him in it. Not a reflection this time, not a trick of glass. Just a man standing in my back seat, furious that death cheated him, and furious still that I keep telling his story. The desert around Terlingua feels different at night, like the whole basin has gone hollow and you can hear your own blood in your ears. I drove out there one evening because I'd been told it was the kind of place you had to see for yourself. A borderland between the living and the dead, where the air held onto history, the way old walls hold onto smoke. The ruins looked like broken teeth jutting up from the ground, adobe melted down by rain and heat but still standing stubbornly against the wind. There was a moon, pale and swollen, that made the shadows sharp against the hills and gave every half-collapsed house the look of something waiting, watching. You couldn't help but think of the men who had worked themselves sick here, hunched over ore that gave off poison with every breath, and how many of them never walked out of the shafts with their lungs still whole. I walked through what used to be the main stretch of town, crunching gravel under my boots. The old cemetery sat just up the rise, crosses made of iron and wood leaning at angles, graves outlined with stones pulled from the hills. People said if you listened you'd hear, coughing out there, not the kind you get from a cold but the deep tearing sound of lungs ruined by dust and mercury. I told myself that was just wind dragging across the arroyos, but the longer I stood still, the less convincing that explanation felt. The wind carried grit, and the grit carried a taste like metal on my tongue. Every time I drew breath, it was like swallowing the ghost of what killed them. One of the buildings still had its walls mostly intact. A bar maybe, or a bunkhouse. The adobe had hardened into strange patterns where rain streaked it, and the doorway was just a dark hole in the wall. I stepped inside with my flashlight sweeping the beam across the room. Wooden beams blackened by age stretched across the ceiling. There were outlines on the floor where beds had been, scraps of rusted metal, a chair with one leg missing. I thought I heard a shuffle in the corner, like cloth dragging on stone, but when I swung the light that way, it was nothing but shadows stacked against the wall. The silence afterward pressed heavy, too heavy for an empty ruin. I could hear my breathing, harsh and uneven, and when I stopped to hold it, something else breathed back. I told myself to leave then, but something about Terlingua pulls at you, like the earth has hands and it doesn't want to let go. I walked deeper into the desert, past the ruins toward where the mine shafts cut into the hills. The moonlight spilled across the desert floor, bright enough to see the outline of the entrances, black wounds in the hillside. One of them had collapsed. Timbers snapped like kindling, but another still gaped wide enough for a man to walk in. The air around it was cooler, sinking out of the earth like breath from a grave. When I leaned close, I swear I heard the echo of coughing down there, ragged and endless, like a whole shift of men had been trapped inside for 100 years, still choking, still trying to draw one last lungful of clean air. I didn't want to step inside, but I did. The ground sloped down sharply, the walls close enough that my shoulders brushed them. My flashlight beam cut ahead, showing broken tools, rusted buckets, rails where carts once ran. My boots stirred up dust that smelled wrong, sharp and bitter like old poison. After a few steps, I started to feel it in my chest, a tightness that made it hard to breathe. The coughing started again, not echoing this time, but all around me, close enough that it felt like someone was at my shoulder. I turned with the light, but there was no one, just wet stone glistening in the beam and a darkness behind me that pressed closer every second. I tried to breathe slow, telling myself it was panic, but the tighter my chest grew, the harder it was to deny that I was inhaling the same death those men had. The beam of my light flickered, dimmed, and that's when I saw it. A shape, leaning against the wall, shoulders hunched, head hanging. It looked human for half a second until it turned and I saw the eyes, burning faint like coals through layers of dust and ruin. It opened its mouth, but no words came out, just the sound of tearing coughs, wet and deep as though it was vomiting up its lungs. More shapes stirred in the dark, stepping slow out of the stone, outlines of men eaten away by mercury, faces pale as the moon, eyes glowing through the dust. They were coughing in unison, a sound so thick it filled the tunnel, bouncing off the walls until it felt like the mine was alive and dying all at once. I stumbled back, the light jerking wild, catching glimpses of sunken cheeks and skeletal, hands reaching. I don't know how I got out. The next clear thought I had, I was outside again, flat on the desert ground, my throat raw and burning. The moon hung high, the ruins staring down at me, quiet and empty. But the air still tasted of metal, and my lungs still felt heavy, as if the dust had followed me out. I coughed once, sharp and painful, and I swore I heard it echo, not in the hills this time, but from inside my chest, as though I'd carried something back with me. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel the weight of it sitting in my lungs, waiting for night, waiting for silence, to remind me that once you breathe, Terlingua in, it never really lets you go. The first time I drove down Bragg Road, it was late October, one of those muggy Texas nights where the air hangs heavy and the trees seem to breathe with you. The road cut like a scar through the big thicket, stretching out flat and narrow, swallowed by the dark pines on either side. Folks in Saratoga call it the Ghost Road, and they'll tell you not to linger after sundown. I'd grown up hearing about it, that strange light that chases cars, darting ahead like a lantern and then disappearing, only to return right behind you. Some say it's swamp gas. Others swear it's headlights from nowhere, but the story that sticks is the one about the railroad worker who lost his head when the old timber line ran through here, swinging his lantern to warn the crew right before the train cut him down. They buried the body but never found the head, and now his light keeps sweeping through the trees, still searching. I didn't buy any of it until that night. I was 22, restless, and trying too hard to prove to myself I wasn't the kind of man who spooked at ghost stories. My buddy Kyle rode shotgun, his boots on my dashboard, a six-pack of Lone Star sweating between his feet. We'd been at a friend's bonfire, and someone dared us to drive the road alone. I still remember the way the other kids laughed when we pulled out, like they were already writing the story they'd tell if we came back pale-faced or not at all. Bragg Road itself looked ordinary enough at first, just a long dirt trail pressed, flat by years of hunters' trucks. The moonlight was dim under the canopy and the woods pressed close, The kind of close that makes you roll down your window just to be sure there's still a world beyond the glass. The cicadas had gone quiet. That was the first thing I noticed. No noise at all except my tires grinding over gravel and the occasional rattle of a branch brushing the roof. We must have gone 3 miles in before Kyle leaned forward and squinted. "There," he whispered, like he was pointing out a deer. I followed his finger, and sure enough, down the stretch of road was a glow. At first it was faint, like a flashlight lost in fog. It pulsed once, then steadied into a dull yellow orb, hovering dead center. I slowed the car, and the glow seemed to drift forward, keeping the same distance ahead. Kyle chuckled under his breath, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "Headlights," he said, but his voice cracked. I shook my head. It was too high to be headlights, too round, too steady. I killed my high beams for a second just to see, and the thing burned on, undimmed, like it wasn't touched by the dark at all. We crept closer. My hands were slick on the wheel. The light bobbed gently like it was swinging from a hand, then shot sideways into the pines. It should have vanished between the trunks, but it kept glowing, weaving between the trees like someone walking with purpose. I eased the car forward, craning my neck, trying to follow it. Then, as quick as it came, it blinked out. The woods were empty again. Kyle let out a low laugh, forced, like he was trying to convince himself. "Swamp gas," he muttered. I didn't answer. The hair on the back of my neck was prickling like static. We drove another half-mile, and I started to feel stupid, like we just let a trick of light spook us. Then, without warning, the orb reappeared, this time in my rearview mirror. It was closer than I expected, maybe 50 yards behind, bright enough to splash the interior of the car in a pale glow. My throat went dry. Kyle twisted around in his seat, his eyes wide. "It's following us," he said. I pressed the accelerator, the car bouncing over the ruts, but the light didn't fade. If anything, it gained on us, staying just far enough back to keep its shape. I could see the outline of the road ahead clear as day, painted in that unnatural glow. I floored it, the engine whining, and the light shot sideways again, into the trees, vanishing without sound. We finally burst out onto the paved road at the far end, hearts hammering, the night suddenly alive again with the buzz of insects. We didn't speak the whole way back to town. At the gas station, Kyle swore he saw a man in overalls standing under the canopy holding a lantern, but when I turned my head there was no one there. I didn't believe him, I didn't want to. But later that night, lying in bed with the fan turning above me, I swore I could hear the faint rattle of gravel outside my window, like footsteps dragging along a dirt road. That was years ago, but the thing about Bragg Road is it doesn't let you go once you've seen it. Hunters say the light has a way of finding you again, even if you never go back. I've woken in the middle of the night to a glow bleeding through the curtains, steady and yellow, like a lantern paused just outside. Every time I gather the courage to look, it's gone, but the air smells faintly of oil and rust, like old train tracks left to rot in the weeds. Folks say the worker is still looking for his head, and maybe that's true, but sometimes I think he's looking for company, for someone to follow him into the dark woods where the light never goes out. If you ever drive down Bragg Road, remember this. Don't stop the car, don't roll down your window, and for God's sake, don't look too long into that glow. Because once you do, it remembers you, and it doesn't stop until you follow. I grew up in San Antonio, so the missions were always there. Half tourist attractions, half relics that carried a weight people didn't talk about. Most of them are polished up, neat, with plaques and tours and school buses lined up on field trips. But Espada was different. Smaller, more remote, down near the river where the pecans crowd the banks and the mesquite gnarl against the fence lines. People didn't go there much after sundown, not unless they had a reason. I didn't believe half the stories until I had my own. It started when I was working nights with the County Historical Commission. They'd given me a project cataloging artifacts that had been stored in the mission for years, tucked away in locked cabinets. Journals, fragments of vestments, bits of rosaries. old devotional items that had been pulled from the dirt during various restorations. I'd drive down a spotted road, headlights cutting across the brush, until the old stone chapel came into view. The place looked like it grew out of the ground itself. Rough gray walls scarred with time, the bell tower black against the night sky. By day, it was humble, almost peaceful. By night, it felt like it was leaning closer, watching you come in. Theo. First time I unlocked the wooden doors after dark, I remember how the smell hit me. Not just the scent of stone and old wood, but something heavier, like incense burned a century ago and trapped in the mortar. It clung to the back of my throat. The air inside was always cooler, so quiet that the sound of the door shutting echoed, like a gunshot. I set up a folding table under one of the narrow windows and worked by lamplight, photographing, logging, and boxing items. At first it was just quiet, too quiet. My boots on the flagstone seemed louder than they should have been, and every time I shifted, the silence swallowed the sound too quickly, like the building didn't want noise in it. About the third night, I started hearing things, a scrape across the stone that I thought was a rat. But when I turned, nothing moved. A low murmur, too faint to be words, that would slide just beyond the range of hearing whenever I tried to focus. I told myself it was wind, or traffic off, 37 carrying strange. But then one night I dropped a box and froze because I heard it plain as day, chanting. Low male voices in unison, rolling like a tide, somewhere deeper in the mission. It wasn't in English. It wasn't Spanish either. At least not any Spanish I knew. It was guttural, rhythmic, words meant to be said in a place like this. I thought, maybe there was a group doing some kind of reenactment even though I had the only key that night. I picked up my flashlight and walked toward the sound, my boots careful on the floor, breath caught in my chest. The voices carried me into the main chapel. I expected to find men in robes, some after-hours performance, maybe a prayer group that somehow slipped in. But the chapel was empty. The altar stood in pale lamplight, dust hanging in the air like gauze, and the chanting cut off the second I stepped inside. I shined my light across the pews, the walls, the corners. Nothing. Just silence so thick I could hear my pulse in my ears. I didn't sleep much that night. By morning I convinced myself it was imagination. Long hours, too much history in the air. But the next night it started again, only this time I wasn't alone. I saw them. Brown robes, hooded, slipping between columns at the edge of my vision. At first I thought they were shadows cast by my lamp, but shadows don't carry their own weight, don't seem to step with purpose. Every time I turned fully, they dissolved into the stone as if the wall itself drank them in. Once I caught the tail end of a robe, frayed hem dragging across the flagstone, disappearing around the corner. My body went cold all the way through. I wanted to leave, but my keys were still on the table, and something in me said if I turned my back, I wouldn't make it out. The worst came on the fifth night. The cataloging was almost done, and I told myself I'd finish quickly and leave. Around midnight, the air shifted. The temperature dropped until I could see my breath plume. In the lamplight, the chanting rose again, but this time it was loud, like the walls themselves were singing. I backed up against the stone, clutching a rosary I'd been photographing, the beads worn smooth with centuries of use. Out of the shadows, 3 figures stepped into the nave. They were solid this time, not half-glimpsed. Hoods drawn low, faces hidden, robes coarse and brown. They moved in silence except for the chant that vibrated the stone under my boots. I tried to speak, but my throat locked. One of them lifted his head slightly, and where a face should have been, there was only black, like looking into the mouth of a cave. They began to walk toward me. The sound of sandals on stone scraped like blades. I held the rosary out in front of me like a weapon, my hand shaking. The chanting swelled until it was unbearable, until I thought my eardrums would burst, and then silence. Gone. The figures were gone. My lamp flickered and died, plunging me into black. I don't remember leaving. I only remember stumbling outside, gasping at the humid night air and finding my truck keys already in my hand, though I'd left them on the table. I didn't go back, not for weeks. When I finally returned in daylight to turn in my notes, the Mission looked harmless again. Sunlight warming the stones, tourists drifting through with cameras. I went inside, half daring myself, half terrified. Everything looked normal, but when I checked the table where I'd been working, the rosary was still there. I hadn't logged it, hadn't boxed it. Only now the beads were split and scattered, the cross cracked clean down the center like something had crushed it. People still say prayers there, light candles, pose for pictures against the old stone. They don't hear the voices, they don't see the robes slipping back into shadow. But sometimes when the sun sets and the air hangs heavy with the smell of damp stone and wood smoke, you'll hear it faintly from the chapel if you stand quiet. The chanting, the same guttural words. Words no one alive understands. And if you wait too long, you might see the figures moving where no figures should be, their empty faces lifting toward you, waiting for you to join them in the shadows. The stockyards at night always carry a peculiar heaviness, the kind of weight that feels stitched into the air rather than laid on the ground. I had stayed in Fort Worth plenty of times, but Miss Molly's hotel was different. The brick building leaned against Exchange Avenue like an old woman with secrets, the kind you could smell in the wood and hear in the stair creaks. The clerk who checked me in was friendly enough, a middle-aged man with thin glasses and a smile that looked practiced but not genuine. He didn't hand me a key so much as push it across the counter, like he wanted to be rid of it. "Room 3, he said. "Second floor, end of the hall." Then he muttered, half joking but not really, "Don't mind the noises if you hear them." The stairs were narrow, polished by years of boots and heels, some of them probably not from this century. I carried my bag up slowly, noticing how the wallpaper along the stairwell peeled in strips, revealing darker layers underneath. The second floor landing smelled faintly of perfume, old and sour, as though someone had spilled it into the cracks of the floorboards 100 years ago and it had never dried. I walked down the corridor and realized there were mirrors hanging opposite each door. Each one was cloudy, mottled, as if every breath taken in front of them had left something behind. I tried not to linger on my reflection. The hallway lights were dim, and in each mirror the glow looked different, as if the bulbs were weaker in glass than in real life. Room 3 opened with a sticky groan. The room wasn't big, but it was dressed like it had been waiting for someone. A heavy quilt spread across the bed, lace curtains hanging in the window, a vanity with another cloudy mirror standing in the corner. I set my bag down and sat on the mattress. The springs were stiff, but not dead. The quilt smelled faintly of roses, the kind old ladies pressed in Bibles. I told myself it was just the age of the place, the atmosphere of history. Miss Molly's had been a bordello once, I knew that. Every inch of the room carried that sense of business conducted in whispers and shadows. When I turned my head, the vanity mirror seemed to hum. Not sound exactly, but a feeling like when your ears ring in the quiet. I rubbed my temples and told myself I was just tired. That night, I woke to the sensation of weight shifting beside me. The room was dark except for the slice of streetlight spilling through the lace curtains. I froze, my breath shallow, listening. The mattress had dipped, like someone had just lain down beside me. My eyes adjusted slowly, but the space was empty. Only the quilt bunched where no one lay. I tried to convince myself it was just the springs resetting, some old mechanical twitch of the bed, but I couldn't ignore the warmth pressing against my side. Not heat from the blanket, but the definite impression of a body. My skin prickled as though an arm were draped lightly across me, though there was nothing there. I didn't sleep after that. I lay still, staring at the ceiling until pale morning light spread through the curtains. When I finally rose, the quilt showed the clear indentation of someone lying next to me. A faint, feminine outline pressed into the fabric. The air near the bed was cold, much colder than the rest of the room. I dressed quickly, hands shaking, and stepped into the hallway. That was when I noticed the mirror across from my door. The glass was fogged, as if someone had breathed against it. And in the condensation, faint but deliberate, was the curve of a lip print. I thought about leaving right then, but some stubborn part of me wanted answers. I went downstairs and asked the clerk if anyone else had been in my room. He looked at me over his glasses and shook his head. "Room 3 stays empty more often than not," he said, "and when someone does sleep there, they usually don't last the night." He told me about the bordello days, about how one of the women had been found strangled in that very bed, left for the next man to discover. They said her spirit never checked out. He spoke casually, like he'd told the story too many times to care about the details anymore, but his eyes had that flicker of unease. He handed me coffee without being asked, as though he knew I'd need it. The second night I left the lamp on. I tried to read, but the words kept blurring. Around midnight, I noticed the mirror at the vanity beginning to fog. Slowly, as if someone on the other side of the glass were exhaling steadily, breath after breath. I leaned forward, heart pounding, and for just a moment, I thought I saw a woman's face pressing forward, the pale suggestion of features against the clouded glass. Her lips moved, but I couldn't hear anything. Then the fog broke apart, and it was only my own reflection staring back, my skin ghostly under the lamp. The smell of roses grew stronger as the night went on. Not pleasant, but cloying, rotten at the edges. When I lay down, the mattress dipped again, heavier this time. The quilt tightened around my body, as if pulled by invisible hands. My breath caught, and I whispered into the dark, "Who are you?" The air shifted, colder, and a faint pressure touched my cheek. Not like a caress, more like a claim. I bolted upright, heart hammering, and the room seemed to ripple with movement, shadows sliding along the walls where nothing should have been. I didn't last a third night. At dawn, I gathered my things and left the key on the counter. Clerk didn't ask why. He just nodded as though he had been expecting it. As I stepped onto Exchange Avenue, the weight lifted from my chest, but not completely. Even now, weeks later, I wake in the night feeling the dip of a mattress beside me, the air gone suddenly cold, the faint outline of lips brushing the sheets. And every morning, when I pass the mirror in my hallway, I check to see if it's fogged. Some mornings, it is. The first time I saw Camp Lulu, it was by accident. I had driven down to Brownsville to meet a contractor about a small job I was taking on, and I had some time to kill before the meeting. I was cutting through an old farm-to-market road that hugged the edge of the Rio Grande, lined with brush and half-dead mesquite, when I noticed a wooden sign leaning crookedly in the weeds. Camp Lulu in faded paint, the letters barely visible beneath peeling varnish. The arrow pointed down a dirt road that was half choked with cane and vines. I almost kept going, but there was something about the name, something that scratched the back of my mind. I turned anyway, thinking I'd just see where it led. The road bumped along for a quarter-mile before it opened into a clearing. What spread out in front of me looked like something from another time. Wooden cabins leaned against themselves as if they were tired, their roofs sagging, windows boarded or shattered. A stone mess hall stood at the center, its chimney cracked, and beyond it a playground. The metal slide rusted through, and the swings hanging limply on chains streaked with orange. The whole place seemed to exhale abandonment. Even the air was heavy, like the humid South Texas heat had thickened in the clearing and refused to let go. I sat there in the car for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, trying to place why I felt a faint chill despite the 90-degree heat. I stepped out, my boots crunching on gravel that had been swallowed by weeds. The cicadas buzzed in the brush, but it felt like sound was struggling to fill the space, like the camp drank it up before it could settle. The cabin smelled of rot and mildew. I peeked into one, where a row of bunk beds stood against the wall, their mattresses nothing but mounds of chewed stuffing and mouse droppings. Carvings were etched into the wood beams, names, hearts, initials. I ran my hand across one and felt splinters catch my skin. I imagined kids once laughing in here, sweaty from swimming in the river, sneaking candy, writing names of summer crushes into the walls. For a second I could almost hear it, and then I realized the cicadas had gone quiet. The silence made my chest tighten. It was then I heard the first sound that didn't belong to me. A giggle, high and quick, like a child trying to stifle a laugh. It came from the far side of the mess hall. I froze. It's not unusual to hear things in the brush, a coyote, a feral cat. But this wasn't an animal. This was human and small. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks, the echo of thoughts I'd been having about kids in the cabins. Still, I walked slowly toward the sound. The mess hall doors were open, hanging off their hinges, and I could see long tables warped with age inside. As I stepped closer, something scuttled in the shadows, and I caught a glimpse of a shape moving between the tables. When I stepped in, the smell hit me first, damp stone, mold, and beneath it something sour, like old milk. I backed out fast, telling myself again it was raccoons or rats. But I couldn't shake the sound of that laugh. I should have left right then. I knew it. But curiosity has teeth, and once it bites, it doesn't let go. I followed the trail behind. The mess hall, a path barely visible leading toward the river. The trees grew denser, twisting over the trail until they knitted a canopy that turned the air darker, cooler. The Rio Grande was just ahead, wide and sluggish, the brown water glinting in slivers of sun. The river carried a smell too, wet earth and silt, and something else. I can't explain it. Not rot exactly, but something living that shouldn't be. As I stood there, I heard the giggle again, but this time it stretched into a scream. A child's scream, high-pitched and ragged, echoing from the trees. My skin turned to goose flesh. I spun, trying to find where it came from, but the sound seemed to bounce all around me. The river shifted at my side, and I swore I saw something break the surface, like a hand, small, pale, reaching upward before the current dragged it under. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled back, branches clawing at my arms, and the scream came again, but now it sounded like two voices overlapping. Then three. A chorus of children screaming in the woods, and the laughter was gone, swallowed by those cries. I turned and bolted back toward the clearing, heart hammering, sweat pouring down my back, the world tilting as if the air itself wanted to keep me from leaving. When I burst back into the clearing, I nearly fell. The cabins looked different now. The sun was lower, and shadows stretched across the grass like black fingers. Every window seemed to hold something in the dark behind it. I could swear I saw faces pressed against the glass, pale and waiting, but when I blinked, they were gone. My car was there, thank God, the only thing that looked the same. I yanked the door open and climbed in, slamming it shut as if that thin sheet of metal would protect me. I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed, then caught. As I put it in reverse, I glanced back at the sign by the road. The arrow was gone. Just a plank of wood nailed to the post, blank, as if the name had never been there at all. I drove back to town without looking in the mirror. I didn't want to see if anything was following me. That night in my motel room, I tried to sleep, but the sounds wouldn't let me. I heard the giggling first, faint at the edge of my ears, then the screams rising and falling like the tide. At one point, I swore I felt my mattress sink beside me, as if a small body had sat down on the edge. When I turned, the bed was empty, but the outline of an impression remained in the sheets, pressed deep like someone had only just gotten up. I left Brownsville the next morning, canceled the meeting, packed my bags, and drove north. But even as the miles stretched behind me, the Rio Grande felt like it was following, carrying something along its current that had touched me in those woods. And now, sometimes in the dead of night, when the house is quiet and the cicadas outside have stopped their buzzing, I swear I hear children laughing, soft at first, then twisting sharp into screams that make me sit up with my heart pounding, waiting for a hand, small and wet, to reach out from the dark and touch my arm. San Antonio has always had an odd heaviness about it after dark, like the stones themselves remember too much. And nowhere is that weight stronger than at the corner of Houston and Alamo streets, where the Emily Morgan Hotel towers in pale limestone, over the city. I first stayed there in the summer when the air is hot enough to press sweat out of you just by standing still, and I had booked the room for convenience. not for any thrill of ghosts. Business trip, 3 nights, nothing more. But I should have known better. Old places in Texas don't forget, and the Emily Morgan was never meant to be just a hotel. Its bones were carved for something colder. I didn't learn until later that the building was originally a medical facility, complete with surgical floors, psychiatric wards, and, most unsettling, a morgue with refrigeration vaults where bodies were stored in rows. You can almost taste that history when you walk in, even though the lobby glitters with polished marble and chandeliers. The kind of taste you can't wash away, metallic and stale like pennies on your tongue. I remember stepping off the street, the sound of late-night traffic fading behind me, and feeling the temperature drop a good 10 degrees. Air conditioning couldn't account for the way the chill sank through my jacket into my skin. The front desk clerk smiled too brightly, as if overcompensating, and slid my keycard across the counter. 19th floor, she said. But when I pressed for directions, her smile faltered just slightly. You'll figure it out, she said, like she'd practiced the line before. The elevators there are old, brass-doored things that shudder and groan, like something waking up. I remember stepping in, watching the mirrored panel catch my reflection. It felt wrong, like the lighting came from a different angle than the fixture above. I pressed 19, and the doors closed with a metallic sigh. Halfway up, the car jerked to a stop, the lights flickered, and the floor indicator froze at 14. I tapped the button again. Nothing. The silence pressed in. No faint hum of machinery, no faint vibration of motion. Just stillness. Then, as sudden as it stopped, the elevator lurched into motion again, bypassed the 15th, 16th, 17th floors without pausing, and when the doors opened, it wasn't 19 staring back at me. It was some dim hallway that didn't belong. The wallpaper was wrong, yellowed and peeling with patterns that matched no era I knew. The carpet was worn down to the threads. No lamps glowed, yet I could see as if by faint moonlight. At the far end of the hall, a shadow crossed slowly, too tall and too thin, moving with an unnatural glide. I called out before I thought better of it, and the shadow froze mid-step, then slid back out of sight. My heart punched my ribs as I slammed the close door button. The panel refused to respond. Only after 30 seconds of panic did the elevator finally creak shut and carry me upward again. This time, mercifully, it opened onto the proper 19th floor. Bright carpet, new fixtures, none of the decay I'd just seen. My hands trembled as I carried my bag down the hall, every instinct screaming to turn back and leave, but I didn't. People always think they'll run when the world cracks sideways. They don't. They rationalize. I told myself stress, fatigue, imagination. I told myself anything to make the night livable. The room itself was ordinary enough, double bed, desk, window looking out over the Alamo itself. But the air never lost that faint chill, and no matter how many times I adjusted the thermostat, the temperature wouldn't rise above 65. I laid in bed, the city lights glowing outside, and sleep came in uneasy waves. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the soft ding of the elevator, muffled but distinct even that high up. It happened again, and again, every few minutes. The elevators, moving. Only there were no late-night guests, no footsteps in the hallway, just the mechanical pulse of doors opening and closing, as if unseen passengers rode them endlessly. The next day, I asked the housekeeping staff if they'd noticed anything strange. A woman with gray streaks in her hair paused, glanced around, then said quietly, "Sometimes the elevators don't stop where they should. Sometimes they stop where there ain't no floors anymore." She turned back to her cart before I could ask more. That night, the activity returned with more force. The ding grew louder, closer, until at one point it sounded like it came from right outside my room. I sat up, listening, and the knob on my door rattled once, hard enough to shake the frame. I froze, heart hammering, waiting for the next twist. It didn't come. Instead, footsteps retreated slowly, measured and heavy, down the carpeted hall. But when I finally gathered the courage to open the door, no one was there. On the third night, the hotel bared its teeth. I stepped into the elevator to head down for dinner, The car filled with the faint smell of antiseptic, sharp and chemical, burning my nostrils. I pressed the button for the lobby, but the elevator sank instead of rising, the panel skipping numbers in reverse until it hit the basement. The doors opened on blackness so deep it seemed solid. The smell grew stronger, and beneath it lay another odor, rank and sweet. The unmistakable rot of decay. Something shifted in the dark, and I heard a faint dragging sound like something heavy pulled across the floor. My instinct screamed, and I jabbed the close door button. For once, it obeyed, slamming shut, carrying me back up to the lobby with a violent jolt that nearly knocked me down. When the doors opened again, I staggered out into the light and didn't look back. I checked out early that night, ignoring the raised eyebrows at the desk. Outside, the humid summer air wrapped me in its heat, sticky but alive, and I've never been so grateful for it. Later research confirmed what I'd already felt. The 19th floor had once been psychiatric wards. The 12th held surgical suites. The basement, of course, was the morgue. Guests over the years had reported all of it. Lights flickering, shadows moving where none should be, elevators carrying them to places that don't exist. Some stories said you could catch a glimpse of bodies in the corner of your eye, rolled out from those old ice vaults, shadows riding the elevators to nowhere, trapped between floors of the living and the dead. I don't stay in San Antonio anymore. Not overnight. You can dress a place up, polish the marble, hang chandeliers, and smile at guests all you want. But some buildings carry their original purpose like scars. The Emily Morgan may call itself a hotel now, but the truth is simpler. It's still a Tower of the Dead, and some nights the dead still ride. The dirt road was nothing more than a scar cut into the earth, winding out from the edge of Huntsville like it had been dragged there by something heavy, something that didn't care if it left a wound behind. Locals called it Demon's Road, though on any map you'd just see Bowden Road, stretching out past ranch fences and thinning neighborhoods until it gave way to a tunnel of oaks. The trees grew in so close you could almost hear them breathe, their roots twisting through the red clay like veins. By day it wasn't much more than a back road, the kind you'd take if you wanted to shave a few minutes off a trip into town. But at night it turned into something else. The air seemed to thicken the farther you went, and if you rolled down your window, you'd swear you could hear whispers carrying on the stillness. Low enough you couldn't make out words, but close enough you knew they weren't your own thoughts. I had heard about it my whole life, the way kids in Huntsville did. The place where red eyes glowed out of the dark, where shadows walked behind your car and followed you all the way home, where trespassers who dared to step foot in Old Gribble Cemetery came back different, if they came back at all. It was one of those places you told yourself you'd never actually go to, until life lined up in just the right way, and there you were, headlights slicing through the branches, gravel crunching under your tires. I was 22 the first time. I drove out there, a couple friends in the car with me, all of us trying to act like we didn't believe in the stories. We laughed too loud, kept the windows rolled up, and never once said we were scared, even though our eyes kept darting to the mirrors, waiting for something we couldn't name. The further down the road we went, the quieter it got. Crickets hushed. Cicadas fell silent. Even the wind seemed to die before it could reach us. The world outside our headlights looked like it had been swallowed whole. Nothing but black on black. The branches overhead laced together like ribs. My buddy in the passenger seat swore he saw someone running parallel with the car, just inside the trees, but when I looked there was nothing, just shadows bending where they shouldn't. He stopped talking after that, staring straight ahead. The color drained from his face. We didn't last long before we turned back, tires spitting gravel like we couldn't get out fast enough. But even when we were back in town, back under streetlights and neon signs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still with us, clinging to the back of the car like a hitchhiker we hadn't meant to pick up. It was years later when I went back, and I was alone that time. I don't know what made me do it. Curiosity, maybe. Or the way certain places start to work on you when you think about them too long, pulling you back whether you want it or not. The night was warm, heavy with humidity, and the sky was a patchwork of clouds hiding the moon. The trees seemed even denser than before, their limbs arching overhead until the road felt more like a tunnel, the kind you didn't expect to come out the other side of. My headlights swept over the trunks and I saw carvings in the bark. Initials, dates, crosses cut deep like warnings left behind. The oaks didn't seem to mind. They stood there, ancient and watching, the scars on their skin like trophies. I kept going until the road opened into a clearing, and there it was, the old iron gate, rusted through in places, bent at the hinges, guarding what was left of old Gribble Cemetery. I killed the engine, and the silence that followed pressed in on me like a weight. There was no breeze, no rustle of animals, just stillness thick enough to choke on. I had heard the stories about the cemetery too. People said it was cursed, that the graves never settled right, that sometimes the ground shifted as though something underneath was trying to get out. They said if you walked between the stones at night, you could hear children crying, though no children were ever buried there. And they said that if you were unlucky, if you stayed too long, you'd see them, eyes glowing red from the dark, watching, waiting. The gate groaned when I pushed it, the sound carrying out into the night like a warning I should have listened to. The grass inside was tall, nearly to my knees, and the stones were crooked, some sunk halfway into the dirt, names worn down to nothing. The deeper I went, the heavier the air got, thick and humid until it felt like breathing through a wet cloth. My flashlight beam shook in my hand, bouncing over cracked marble and weeds. Every now and then I caught the impression of movement in the corner of my eye, but when I turned the beam there was nothing but graves, endless and silent. I don't know how long I stood there before it happened. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe longer. Long enough for the silence to crawl under my skin, long enough for me to start thinking I'd made a mistake. Then I saw them. 2 points of light, low, to the ground at first, then higher, like something had risen up from a crouch. They glowed an unnatural red, not like reflection, not like the shine of an animal caught in a beam. These burned, steady and unblinking, fixed right on me. My throat went dry, and I felt a surge of something deep in my chest, something that said, "Don't move, don't even breathe." But I did. I took a step back, and when I did, the lights blinked out. For a second I thought I'd imagined them, that my eyes were playing tricks. But then I heard it. A sound that started as a low growl, not from an animal, not from any throat I'd ever heard. It rumbled through the ground, vibrated in my bones, and with it came a stench, heavy and sour like rotting earth turned over after too many years. I turned, ready to run, but the grass shifted in front of me, parting as though something unseen moved through it. My flashlight swung wildly, catching glimpses of the ground buckling, stones tilting, dirt spilling into hollows that hadn't been there a second before. The growl rose into a roar, and for a moment I thought the whole cemetery was waking up, every grave loosening, every body clawing its way out. I bolted for the gate, crashing through the grass, stumbling over stones, the beam of my flashlight jerking across the dark. Behind me, I heard the snap of branches, the heavy thud of footsteps that didn't belong to anything living. And then, the eyes were back, closer this time, too close, flashing in the corners of my vision as if they surrounded me. I didn't look back again. I hit the gate so hard it nearly came off the hinge, scraping my leg as I shoved through. My car was only a few yards away, but it felt like miles, the darkness thickening with every step. When I finally slid into the driver's seat and fumbled the keys into the ignition, the headlights came on and caught something at the edge of the clearing, a figure tall and thin, its shape blurred like smoke, its head cocked at an angle too sharp to be human. The eyes burned bright, brighter than before, and for a heartbeat I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think. Then the engine roared to life and I tore out of there, tires spitting gravel, the figure swallowed by the dark. I didn't stop until I was back in town, parked under the harsh lights of a gas station, hands trembling on the wheel. Even then, even with the hum of cars on the highway and the buzz of neon over the pumps, I couldn't shake it. The feeling that something was still with me, watching from the shadows, waiting. They say if you go down Demon's Road, you don't always come back alone. I believe that now. Some nights when the house is quiet and the world outside is still, I catch a glimpse in the corner of the room, low and steady, burning red. And I wonder if I ever really left that road behind. Seguin sits low to the river, A town that smells like pecan shells and wet limestone when the sun drops behind the courthouse. I came in from the east with the evening heat clinging to the hood of my car, watching the sky fade over the line of oaks along 90 and the fat shape of the world's largest pecan glinting like a joke nobody laughs at anymore. The GPS wanted to push me down the interstate, but I took the slow way through town because slow roads tell you more about where you are. The Magnolia Hotel stood where I knew it would, on a block that looked like it had been rebuilt enough times to forget its original face. The hotel had two faces anyway. One side with windows replaced and paint behaving itself, lights glowing warm behind lace. The other side like a molting snake, flaking wood and scabbed plaster, boarded panes and a door that was more hinge than wood. I parked by the curb and turned off the engine. The quiet that followed was not silence. It had the layered sound of a place that had hosted too many nights. I was there to write a piece. There's always a reason you tell yourself, and that was mine. The magazine in Austin wanted a Texas haunt for October, something with history that wouldn't embarrass them. When the old-timers wrote in to correct dates and names, Magnolia had Comanche raids in its bones, German parishioners, soldiers who'd taken off their boots and not put them back on, a bartender shot through the cheek, a woman who went off the balcony with a prayer in her teeth. It had been a stage, stop, an inn, a saloon, apartments, and every iteration had left its scrawl on the walls. Half restored, the editor had said on the phone. Half rotting, like the state itself. I told him Texas was bigger than that. He laughed and asked for 3,000 words and photos that didn't look like they had been taken through a bottle. The caretaker met me with a ring of keys that looked like they belonged to the jail. She was small and dark-eyed and introduced herself as Rosa. She wore a denim jacket even though the evening was thick enough to drink. Her grandmother had worked at the hotel when it was apartments, she said, and her grandmother's mother had scrubbed floors here when men brought their own sheets and prayed on them before sleeping. You got the run of the place, she told, me handing over the keys. But not the blue door upstairs. We're fixing beams behind there and the floor has hollow spots. I don't need you dropping into the first floor and suing me. I said I'd stay out of the blue door. I asked if the rooms were numbered the way they used to be and she shrugged. Mostly. The numbers know where they go even if the brass tags get lost. She left me with a flashlight that looked like it could fend off a dog and an admission that she didn't like to be in the building after 9. It isn't that I'm scared, she said, which is what people say when they're trying to respect something that has teeth. It's that it gets crowded. She glanced at the staircase when she said it, as if someone might be coming down slow, one hand sliding along the rail. The lobby had been made presentable. The gas fireplace had an electric glow now, and 2 velvet chairs faced it like old men, pretending they'd never argued. But the seams showed. A section of original floor had been left raw to display the grain, and in that section, I saw 2 long grooves that had been filled and sanded and filled again. They ran under the newel, post toward the door. It made me think of the way heavy things drag. It put a dry taste in the back of my mouth like old rope. I went upstairs with the camera bouncing against my chest, and that slow, hollow sound of my steps that old hotels amplify. Hall light came from a couple of lamps that fought bravely against the corners. One corridor was polished and hung with framed photos. A couple smiled over a cake in the 70s. A soldier in a kepi looked stubborn. A woman in a white dress stood on the balcony with her hands on the rail. The other corridor had rooms with no doors and rooms with doors whose paint had weathered into a patient blister. The air moved differently from one step to the next as if you were walking past invisible windows, each one stuck in its own season. I picked a restored room at the turn of the hall. The bed had a modern mattress on an iron frame that must have been original, black paint rubbed thin on the knobs by 100 hands. The plastered wall wore its scars proudly, long cracks feathering out and smoothed as if by bandage. A ceiling fan ticked once when I pulled the chain, then decided it would keep its counsel. There was a table with a Bible on it, and under the Bible a ledger, not original but a reproduction with entries copied in a careful hand. Names, dates, crudely drawn birds. I ran a thumb over the fake old paper and felt the smooth skim of the pen that had made it. Then I set my bag on the chair by the window and watched the street where a pickup crawled by, and a man with a dog paused to look up, the way people do when they feel eyes on them. After a while, I took my notebook and went downstairs to walk the first floor. The kitchen smelled faintly of lye, though I knew no one had boiled sheets there in 80 years. A door on the back hall stuck against its frame and opened onto a narrow yard where the grass had given up. Beyond that, I could see the dark line of the river trees and hear the low talk of water over stone. The saloon room had a bar that had been polished until it could have floated away if someone cried on it. On the back shelf stood a half-dozen bottles filled with colored water to look like whiskey, all labels that would never be read by the people who needed them most. I stood behind the bar because I could and looked into the long room the way a bartender must have, seeing every face twice, once in flesh and once in the mirror. The mirror was new, or new enough, but it still held the patience an old bar mirror. As mirrors in rooms like that don't forget what they've watched, and you can feel their stiff respect for anyone who stands behind the counter. I took pictures. I took notes that meant little to anyone else. The shadows lengthened in that particular way small towns have, with no skyscrapers to make long wedges, just the simple, honest dark easing up the wall. When I climbed back to my room, I paused by the blue door out of habit, the way you test a fence with the toe of your boot even after you've been told it's hot. The wood was cool. The knob had a stubborn feel, like it was trying to hold its shape against a memory of hands. I caught myself leaning so close that my breath washed the paint. The smell behind that door was old rain and damp linen. I stepped back and went to my room without trying the key. I slept and then I didn't. Sleep in strange places comes in pieces. First you lie on the bed you have decided is safe. Then your body hums at a different frequency, listening for the low bump in the floorboard, the tick of a cooling pipe, the cough that means you're not alone. I woke sometime in the black middle when the light has failed everywhere. The fan had found a way to move after all. It made a soft rotary sound, blades stirring the air that tasted faintly of char, the smell you get when you blow out a match and pinch the ember with your fingers. It took me a moment to understand the other sound, because the brain tries to make footsteps into wind and wind into distant cars before it will accept what it is. The sound was walking. It came slow down the hall and paused at my door. There was that small worldly noise of a hand meeting a doorknob, skin against metal, a knowing little click from the mechanism as if it too remembered how to do this. Then nothing. The force withdrew not in retreat but in decision, the way someone chooses to be polite and move on. I told myself it was Rosa checking locks or another volunteer doing a last walkthrough, and I believed that several times. I drifted. I dreamed of pecans dropping slow as seconds onto corrugated tin. I woke sweating and reached for the glass of water I had set on the table. My fingers brushed something that wasn't glass first. It was round and cold and had a weight that didn't belong in the century. I turned on the lamp and found an iron key on the table by my notes. Its tag was a thin brass oval stamped with a number that time had bruised. It might have been 12. It might have been 72. It had the smell of metal that has learned the taste of hands. I sat there with my heart behaving irresponsibly and listened to the fan. The hallway stayed quiet like a held breath. When I took the key to the door and tried it out of some stupid impulse, the key didn't fit my lock. It was older, the teeth both deeper and simpler. It might have liked a keyhole where the wards were made with a file by a man who thought of himself as a locksmith because someone had called him one. In the morning, the light through the window had that chalky look of river towns. Rosa came with coffee. She saw the key on my table and set the cup down so suddenly some of it slopped over her hand. "Where'd you find that?" I told her. She took a step back as if I'd set a snake there. "We had a set like that years ago," she said. "The brass tags were original. Folks would take pictures with them. Then one went missing. We put the rest away. We don't bring them out." "You think someone brought this one out?" I said. But we both knew that wasn't what she thought. "You should put it back where you got it," she said. And when I told her I hadn't got it anywhere but here, she nodded the way you nod at a story that has already happened and can't be argued with. On the second afternoon, I did the things people do in hotels to make them their own. I put my book face down on the bedspread and propped my hat on the chair and laid my wallet on the dresser, stacked neatly with my keys and the card that opens most doors in this century. I opened the ledger because I wanted to read some of the names. The handwriting was careful and practiced and no doubt copied from the original. There were pages where the ink changed weight, a mechanical pen running out and being replaced. Names that looked like they were pronounced in German, names that came out flat and American. In the margin of one page, a child had drawn the kind of bird children draw, a V descending toward a square tree. I ran a finger under it and felt a faint roughness I couldn't explain, as if ink were old enough to lift. I walked in the heat, then because that's what makes a story honest. You put your feet on the same streets the people used to walk, and even if it's all wrong now with new windows and chain restaurants and the ghost of a train that doesn't come anymore, you still put your body through the shape of it. I followed the courthouse blocks and crossed to Starka Park, where families picnicked and the river moved slow enough to be mistaken for sleep. A boy worked a fishing line like it was a prayer. Downstream, the old power plant wore its new face. Upstream, the oaks leaned out as if to whisper. The air felt full of words I couldn't parse. On the way back, a woman on a porch asked me if I was staying at the Magnolia. I told her yes. She looked at the hotel and then at me and said, "Mind your throat." As if that were practical advice like watch your step or keep your receipt. When I asked what she meant, she shook her head and pretended she'd been speaking to her dog, an old thing with its eyes filmed over. That night the building crowded in. There's no other way to say it. I could hear voices in the way people hear storms before they arrive, pressure changing, animals quieting. A train's long horn came, down the tracks from some other town, and the sound bent as it entered the hotel, folded over words that didn't want to be heard. In my room, the lamp dimmed as if someone had taken a step between me and the bulb. The fan clicked, not brokenly but rhythmically, in time with something else. When the air on my face cooled suddenly, I thought of all the years the windows downstairs had been open to night breezes with lanterns burning, all the breath that had gone in and out inside those rooms, thin and strong and whiskey sour and incense sweet. I turned the recorder on because there are parts of me that will always reach for evidence when the rest of me wants to pray. There was a soft scuff under my bed then. I put the recorder on the floor and crouched beside the bed so I could look under it. The boards had been swept and then left alone for longer than anybody admitted. A penny lay at the edge, brown as a scab, head side up with a year I could barely make out. Above the penny, the underside of the mattress wore the fuzz of age. Something shifted on the far side and made the penny turn a hair. I slid the recorder closer and watched the red light blink. The shifting stopped. I stayed there a long minute, face level with a territory that children know well. When I stood, my knees cracked loudly, and the sound embarrassed me, as if I'd startled a polite guest around 2 footsteps again. Not by my door this time, running. Not the run of a man chasing or fleeing, but the light patter you get when boys have been told to go upstairs and can't contain the sprint that carries them to the landing. Another set followed heavier, a stern cadence. A voice called a name I couldn't make out through the door. There was laughter that became coughing and then became prayer. All of it stacked in the air like radio stations intersecting. The building didn't feel malevolent. It felt busy, the way a kitchen feels when every burner is going. When the doorknob turned, it turned in such an ordinary way that terror came, late. I expected to see it move, see the shiver in the metal or the long, slow push from the other side. But what I saw first was the latch give. The sure little mechanical compromise of a door that has done this so often it doesn't intend to argue. I stood and crossed to it and put my hand on the knob as it turned. The metal was neither cold nor hot. It was body temperature, as if someone else's hand pressed the other side a skin thickness away. I spoke the first thing in my head. "I'm not here to take anything." The turning stopped. Not because whoever was outside had been offended or satisfied, but because that wasn't the script. The air hung with a waiting I could almost taste. I opened the door and found the hall exactly as it had been, shadows piled where corners make them. The blue door 3 rooms down was a deeper dark, as if it gathered more night than the rest. When I reached the blue door, the knob was colder than my hand expected. I told myself to be careful, and then watched my hand do something uncareful. The key in my pocket had no business being there, but it was. It turned in the lock that didn't belong to it and made a patient old sound. The door opened inward a thumb's width as if pushed by a breeze. The smell that came through was old, soap and iron and the honest rot of wood that has held rain. My throat tightened in a way that reminded me of the woman on the porch. I opened the door enough to put my head in and then more, because you can't put only your head into a room like that. You have to let your body follow so it isn't alone. The floor beyond stepped down a fraction. I tried it tentatively and felt it hold. The room had been stripped bare for work. Joists grinned out of the wall, their faces planed smooth 100 years ago and cut open again. A square of moonlight lay on the floor like a handkerchief. Dust motes hung in it, industrious and gentle. In the far corner, a slatted door had been set short of the ceiling, a closet someone fitted with attention and then never used, as if using it would break a spell. On the inner side of that closet door, someone had drawn small marks with chalk, pale lines in a pattern that didn't belong to carpenters. I recognized a game I had seen on sidewalks, hopscotch, but the boxes were wrong, doubled and interlaced as if made by a child taught by someone who remembered a different version. I stood there with a ridiculous sense that I shouldn't step on the chalk, as if something would make a face at me from the dark and say that I'd spoiled the score. As if a child waited for me to move aside with the gravity children reserve for games. The air changed. All rooms have quick weather, and the weather in that one dropped 10 degrees in the time it takes a person to swallow. Then came a weight that wasn't wind or heat or gravity. It was attention. The hairs on my arms tightened with it. I knew, without knowing how, that the attention had gathered in the closet. I took a step, the floor answering, my palm slick on the useless flashlight I'd brought but not turned on because light would have cheapened it all somehow. My toe tapped the chalk. The sound it made was not the dry scratch of toe on dust. It was the clack of small shoes, a voice murmured right by my ear. It wasn't words yet, breath trying on syllable. Then it found itself. Stay back from the door. It was a woman's voice, not in command but in anxious instruction, urgent, with love and fear. Another sound layered under it, the noise a rope makes when it holds weight and the fibers begin to speak to each other. I stepped away from the closet door without thinking. A shape shifted behind the slats, not visible to the eye but changing, the negative space in a way your body recognizes before your brain does. The rope sound creaked again, higher this time, and the air tightened around my neck, and then let go like a hand reconsidering. I touched my throat and found the skin cold and dry. My fingers came away with a smear of white on them. Chalk. The attention backed away a fraction. Then footsteps ran across the chalk in the pattern of the boxes, a child charging the game and vanishing at the closet, as if the world ended at that door and started again behind it. When I lifted my hand, in that silly old truce gesture, and said I was leaving, relief untied itself in the room like a knot unpicked. The door moved against my palm with a personality that shouldn't belong to wood. It shut, not with anger, but with a precise old politeness. The key wouldn't turn. I didn't try very hard. By the time I got back to my room, the recorder on the floor had reached its capacity and stopped blinking. I washed the chalk off my fingers in the sink and watched the water run white and then clear. When I looked in the mirror, my throat had a pale ring on it where the chalk dust had sat. For a second I saw a faint darker band under the skin, a shadow that memory cast. Then I blinked and it was only reflection and bad light. I listened to the recording at 5 in the morning with the window open to the sound of the trash truck on the next street and birds working the light for worms. The first 5 minutes held nothing but the fan and me breathing, then the running footsteps. The recorded sound of footsteps is never as convincing as the real thing, but this had weight to it. A quick patter, and then the heavier follow. A voice spoke faintly under the mechanical grind of the recorder. I turned, the volume all the way, and pressed the buds into my ears until they hurt. The same woman's voice I'd heard in the blue room said something in German. 4 words. I don't speak German, but my grandfather did, and a handful of phrases had filtered down through him like coins through fingers. I recognized one word, because it had the shape of the command he used for our dog when we were children. Stay. The rest tugged at memory without finding purchase. I played that 10 seconds again and again until the syllables were no longer words but sounds, and in that way I heard the meaning. Not translation exactly, but intent. Stay away. Mind your throat. Hush. On the last day I wrote my piece the way you write when you know the real story isn't yours to sell. I made it clean. I described the restoration and the echoes of the frontier, and the way river towns hold the past like a seed holds spring. I mentioned the key in a throwaway sentence about artifacts and the way they sometimes surface when you live among them. I didn't write about the closet or the chalk or my knees cracking like a joke in a quiet chapel. I didn't write about the blue door because I had promised not to be there in the first place. I took pictures that were honest without being cruel. The camera caught dust motes standing in light, boards planed when the state was young, the careful stitch of new paint into old. It did not catch a shape or a suggestion of a shape. I was grateful for that and disappointed in a way I'm not proud of. Rosa took the key from me on the porch as if I were surrendering a foundling. She held it in both hands, thumbs rubbing the tag the way people rub saints to bring help. She said she would put it back with the others, and then changed her mind in the time it takes to breathe in. She looked at the blue door and then at the river trees and finally at me. "It came to you," she said. "You take it out of here. It doesn't belong to me." "Then keep it like something you're holding for a friend," she said. "Some things behave better when you take them off the property." I tried to give it back twice. She refused each time gently, and then with a firmness that had no malice in it. I slipped it into my pocket where it settled like a coin of a currency nobody uses. On the drive out of town, I stopped at the park and watched the river go by. A pecan dropped from a branch without warning and hit the water with a plunk that made a turtle's head pop up to regard me with reptile curiosity. I thought about throwing the key in. The Guadalupe would take it and worry it along rocks and carry it under bridges and drop it in slow eddies where fish nosed at it thoughtfully. But I didn't throw it. I drove on, past the sign for Texas Lutheran, past a kid on a scooter who wore earbuds and sang to himself, past an old man hosing down a driveway. The hotel receded in the mirror and then was gone like it had never been there except that the air in my car smelled faintly of lye. Back home, the key sat on my dresser. It didn't do anything a key shouldn't do, which is to say it lay there and waited for a door. When I slept, I dreamed of doorways. Not doors. Not the wooden parts that swing and complain. The spaces they mark off. I woke with my throat dry and a chalk taste on my tongue I couldn't account for. Once, when a storm came in off the hills and made the power blink, I heard a rope groan inside the wind. A single note sounding from the back of the house where there is no rope and no reason for one. I got up and stood in the hallway with the angry house sounds gracefully coming apart as the rain settled. In the dim, the key's brass tag reflected lightning once, a small moon over an old sea. A week later, I took the recorder to a friend who knows sound. I told him I'd picked up interference from a frequency outside normal range to see if he'd laugh. He didn't. He cleaned the track and lifted the voice until it lived at the edge of distortion. We listened together. He doesn't speak German, either, but he leaned back when the woman spoke like the words carried their own weather. "What do you hear?" I asked. "Someone asking for quiet," he said. "Someone asking for care." I wrote the follow-up paragraph my editor wanted and sent more pictures than he'd asked for to make up for the part I hadn't given him. He wanted a line about the little girl in white. Every place has a little girl in white. I told him there were children, though I hadn't seen any. He asked for a kicker that made the town manager happy and the readers uneasy. I gave him the thing about the two faces of the hotel and the honest work of restoration. How holding the past carefully makes a different kind of future. He called it clean and true and sent me my money. The key is on my desk now as I write this in the late light that makes the dust seem generous. Sometimes it lies exactly where I set it. Sometimes it face turns on the wood, the brass tag catching less or more of the sun without any draft I can feel. Once it slid a fraction toward the edge while I was on the phone with the editor, a patient inching like a bug intent on a new leaf. When I picked it up after that, my fingers smelled faintly of soap and iron and something sweet I cannot identify. Not sugar, but the ghost of it, like violets pressed between pages. These days when I think of the magnolia, I don't picture the blue door first or the chalk or the closet. I think of the layered sound of the place. The way voices sit atop other voices without arguing. like a choir that changed conductors 100 times and never lost the pitch. I think of the woman's voice saying careful in a language that wasn't mine, the way it made my shoulders go down and my lungs remember their job. I think of the man on the bar stool in the mirror who never looked back at me because he didn't belong to any timeline that would allow that trick. I think of Rosa, who loves a building the way a person loves a relative they fight with at Thanksgiving and would fight for any other day of the year. I think of Segun, that slow river town with its good pecans and its damp limestone and its particular honor, the kind that doesn't make a lot of noise. If you go there, you might not see anything but wood and plaster and paint doing the jobs wood and plaster and paint do. You might sleep like you haven't slept in months simply because your phone doesn't get great reception and the trains pass at proper hours. Or you might wake with chalk on your fingers and not know how it got there. You might hear the creak of a rope or the quick steps of a boy who has been told to go upstairs and does so with grief and orneriness intermingled, because that is how boys obey. You might find a key meant for a door 2 centuries behind your own. If you do, hold it like it's not yours and listen when the building gets crowded. Mind your throat. Keep your voice low. And if a door opens a thumb's width for you, breathe the air like someone else taught you how, and remember, you're a guest in a place that has been busy long before you and will be busy long after.